Hello everyone, and welcome to another amazing story. What if Doomslayer won My Hero Academia? This amazing story was written by reeleffendeel. Please support them. Don't forget to like, sub, and leave a comment. Now let's dive in. Chapter 20. The Pecking Order. Island Main Airport. Two gaudy rescue boats with feline motifs moored themselves near the edge of the concrete docks near the edge of the airport. About a dozen or so heroes piled out of the boats and swarmed the tarmac like army ants. Many of them grimaced at the sight of dead sabers littered across the area, either decapitated or had rebars jutting out of them. Focusing back on their objective as they stood before the massive bulkhead doors sealing the entrance, the laser hero Xless fired a thin beam of red-colored energy at the bulkhead from his right eye, easily cutting through it like butter and guiding his laser in a circle to create a makeshift doorway. The slab fell over and the heroes carefully went through the superheated archway, finding themselves in the main atrium, with a large crowd of people staring at them slack-jawed. The heroes are here. A young boy from the crowd yelled at the top of his lungs. The civilians started cheering as loud as possible, with some of them rushing over to embrace them. It couldn't be helped. These poor people had been listening to gunshots and explosions all through the night and witnessed an armored man brutally kill their captors. As a few heroes calmed the crowd down, others began to fan out and secure the airport. They saw more of the vigilantes' handiwork as they went through the hallways, blood decorating the walls and closets filled with dismembered mercenaries. After the whole airport was locked down, they all regrouped in the main atrium. The airport's all clear. No other hostages in sight, Edshot reported, and no sign of any sabers. At least any that are living. Are you sure about that? There have to be alive ones we can apprehend, Bubble Girl said as she used her bubbles to clean the blood off the floor while Death Arms carried the bodies out of the room. Much to the heroes' disgust, of course. We combed the whole interior of the airport. Nothing but blood and bodies everywhere you go. Majestic lowered his oversized hat over his eyes. Do you guys think Melissa was telling the truth about the sabers being all dead? Maybe she was just exaggerating. Fourth Kind reasoned in apparent denial before Hound Dog cut him off. No, they're all dead. This whole island reeks of blood. The hunting dog hero snarled as he bared his teeth. I can barely get a scent on anyone. The work of a madman. Gunhead clenched his hands. What kind of horrors did he put the hostages through? Funny, the civvies are telling a different story. MT Lady deadpanned. A schoolteacher just told me they were about to execute her and some of her students, but that vigilante saved them along with the captives. The heroes reacted with confusion until Vlad validated her claims. She's telling the truth. I just confirmed it with two of our students from UA. He gestured towards Nijire and Tamaki, who was with the civilians. The heroes could only stare at each other in astonished silence. None of this was making any sense whatsoever. I have some very concerning questions right now. Present Mike held up his index finger. A series of noises growing louder could be heard within the airport, alerting the heroes. It sounded like a growing mass of footsteps were moving through the hallways. Unsure of what was heading their way, the heroes got into fighting stances with some moving near the civilians to protect them. The disturbance drew nearer and nearer, putting the pro heroes on edge. They prepared themselves for whatever was around the corner. A large, muscular person was the first to come into view. All Might. The crowd screamed with joy. As the civilians stampeded towards the symbol of peace and crowded around him, more people began to pile into the room. A majority of them looked like partygoers, while the heroes recognized the rest as the famous top-ranked heroes from other countries. Aizawa saw his students enter the atrium and allowed himself to smile at the sight of his still-alive students, but blanched when he saw that they were wounded and had splotches of blood all over them. The other heroes noticed everyone's feet were soaked in blood up to their ankles, and they looked utterly disheveled. What on earth happened to them? Easy people. Give the man some room. MT Lady pried the crowd away from All Might as other heroes followed suit. Once they had calmed the crowd down and got them back into a group for their safety, the pro heroes met with All Might on the other side of the room along with the international heroes. It's good to see you're okay, All Might. Ectoplasm expressed his relief. And I'm happy to see you all. The symbol of peace beamed. I take it the HPSC launched a rescue operation? Communications back on the mainland were jammed for some reason. We couldn't get a hold of anybody, so we decided to do our own little rescue mission. Rocklock folded his arms with pride. All Might couldn't fault them one bit. If you ever get reprimanded for that, I'll vouch for every one of you. Speaking of which, where's Endeavor and Hawks? Don't worry about him, Eraser had assured him, knowing that the Flame Hero was benched by the JSDF. But Kigo went up to the tower to help Rumi. We need to know what's been going on here. What can you tell us? All Might grimly frowned. I don't even know where to begin. It's been a nonstop nightmare for hours. The Sabers unloaded everything they had at him, and they didn't even slow him down. He butchered them all without a hint of mercy or hesitation. Naikang, the #1 pro hero of Sudan, shook his head as his hand rested on the hilt of his sword. I honestly don't think there's a human being underneath that armor. A feeling of dread hung over the pro heroes. Some of them were starting to think that they were probably in over their heads here. But what could they do? Just leave without stopping the vigilante? No, they couldn't. Their honor as heroes wouldn't allow them to do that. Excuse me. Midoriya stepped up to the heroes with Melissa as she held the VX gas rocket. I know you're all having a discussion, but what do we do with this WMD? That's a dash. Power Loader yelled before quickly switching to a whisper to not send the hostages into a panic. That's a bomb. The Steel Sabers had a freaking bomb. No, the League of Villains brought this poison gas dispenser to kill everyone on the island. Melissa corrected as the other heroes gasped in horror. The LOV was here? Midnight asked in a shocked tone. They were working together with the Sabers. Midoriya nodded. The heroes of Japan tensed up when they heard that. To think that the LOV would partner up with a notorious band of mercenaries was something they hadn't considered possible. All Might had already known of that a while ago, but what really set him on edge was what All for One hoped to gain from this. His nemesis must have desired something from the tower's main vault, but what if that wasn't his goal? What if there was something more to this hostile takeover of Island? Yagi felt a familiar sting within him, a warning sign that he was approaching his limit. He needed to find a place where he could power down without any prying eyes nearby. He laid his eyes on the WMD and hatched an idea. We can discuss the League of Villains for another time. Right now, I need to find a way to safely hide this bomb until it can be properly disposed of. There's a security office on the 2nd floor near the baggage claim area. Best Jeanist pointed up to the stairs. They should have some specialized cases meant for confiscation. Then say no more. All Might proudly exclaimed as he took the bomb from Melissa. No need to worry about me. I'll take care of it. He then bounded towards the stairs and jumped up the stairwell like a lightning bolt. So, you thought it was a good idea to bring a weapon of mass destruction into a small area densely packed with civilians. Eraserhead questioningly drawled as his lazy eyes glared down at Midoriya. Boy, was he going to give this kid a lesson in common sense when this was over. I couldn't think of anything else. Izuku mustered an excuse, knowing it wouldn't work on someone like Aizawa. But his teacher could see the trauma in that poor kid's eyes, and he could also see it in his other students. It would be cruel of him to reprimand Izuku in his current state on the spot, and would probably set up a bad example as a teacher. He decided to take pity on him. Don't worry about it. Eraserhead reassured him with sympathy. Go back over to your friends. You've been through enough today. Izuku nodded, and he went back over to the congregation of civilians along with Melissa. However, he stopped and glanced over to the stairway All Might just went up. He had a feeling that his mentor was nearing the limit of his muscle form and needed to find a vacated place where he could power down. The thought of it worried Izuku, aware that Yagi had a time limit on One for All, and he had used up most of it by staying in his powered-up state during the siege. He noticed the heroes were busy discussing their next move with each other and quietly made his way over to the stairs, unaware that Mirio was watching him. Are you serious? Mandalay questioned Cow Lady. Is there really? A river of blood and death all over the island? We just went through it. Cow Lady revealed while pointing to her blood-stained cowboy boots. That crazy sumbitch killed all of them. So the Steel Sabers truly are dead. Centipede's antennae reflexively twitched. But by one man on his own. Yes, we bore witness to every second of his slaughter upon them. Feng Wang, the #1 pro hero of China, shuddered as she held her arms. I believe that he might still be on the island. But we still don't know what happened to Hawks or Maruko. Kemui Woods added. They could be in danger for all we know. Why are you all just standing around? An enraged voice thundered from behind, echoing throughout the atrium. The heroes turned around and were greeted with a sight they weren't expecting but at the same time dreaded. Endeavor. The flame hero stood in the middle of the hole in the bulkhead before stomping through it and ignoring the looks of awe the civilians were giving him. Shoto glared bitterly at his father who barely even noticed him, fueling his contempt for him. Enji, what are you doing here? Backdraft demanded. You were ordered by the JSDF to stand down and just sit by while I watch an insane vigilante run roughshod over us all. Endeavor furiously shouted at the firefighter hero as he glared at the heroes. Never. How did you even get here anyway? Loud Cloud asked absent-mindedly. The other heroes already knew that Enji could use his flames for flight. Endeavor ignored Oboro and continued to vent his fury at the heroes. You should be searching for the vigilante. Why are you wasting your time here? For your information, asshole, there are people in danger who need our protection. Shishido the lion hero growled at him. What did you expect us to do? Just ditch them? I expect you to find him and capture him. Endeavor roared as flames engulfed his body, giving him the appearance of an angry fire god. Where is he? All we know is that he's at the top of the tower. Ryukyu hesitantly answered as she and the others backed away from the intense heat that was radiating off the unstable hero. Hawks flew up there just a few minutes ago. Endeavor snapped his head upwards to the sealed skylight above, and a cone of fire erupted from both of the soles of his boots. The burst of flames nearly knocked everyone over as Endeavor rocketed himself upwards and melted straight through the bulkhead, where he took to the sky and disappeared from sight. The heroes stared up at the perfectly shaped hole in the bulkhead above, making sure to avoid the droplets of superheated slag that dripped from it. Me and my big mouth. Ryukyu groaned as her shoulders sagged. Apache Hurricane, the number 5 pro hero of America, stepped forward and gave the Japanese heroes a stony glare. I've heard that he had a sizable temper, but this is a tad much. The Native American hero remarked as his near-expressionless eagle face kept its eyes focused upon them. This sort of behavior doesn't exactly represent the qualities of a hero, in its pas d'accord. Daimoto, the number 1 pro hero of France, rhetorically stated. The motorcycle heroine raised an eyebrow when she heard a groan from X-Less. He doesn't care. He sighed in resignation. The heroes of Japan could only avoid the other heroes' gazes in shame and embarrassment. Endeavor had always been a problem, and time after time, they had to be the ones to try and salvage their image after one of his outbursts or overzealous capture of a criminal. How the public still praised him was beyond them. Loud Cloud glanced over his shoulders to the civilians and took note of their freaked-out expression from Enji's outburst. Okay, Mr. Pyromaniac is on his own page. What now? Oboro asked nobody in particular. Midoriya reached the 2nd floor and entered the spacious baggage claim area. It was completely deserted with luggage scattered all over the place, but so far there was nothing out of the ordinary. He spotted the security office at the other end of the room with its door ajar. Rushing over to the office, he barged into the room and looked around for his mentor, but there was no sign of him. The room was small with a few desks, a cluster of monitors on the right side, and a cabinet with confiscated baggage. Sitting on the table in the center of the room was a large steel suitcase that was open, revealing the WMD safely tucked inside the foam-lined interior. He heard the sound of someone retching to his left and made a beeline toward the employee bathroom. He walked in just in time to witness Yagi, now powered down, vomiting a stream of blood into the sink. Bwairareg. All might. Izuku yelled as he rushed over to Yagi, who collapsed to the floor. His mentor was taking in lungfuls of air, steam billowed forth from his skin, and blood flowed down his chin, while his costume loosely hung around his frail body. Midoriya carefully slung Yagi's arm over his should and carried him out of the restroom, propping him up on the seat near the table. Are you okay? Izuku asked worriedly. Yagi coughed into his hand, staining it red. I've had better days. Good thing I found someplace secluded. I could barely stay in my muscle form any longer. Had to use up most of it back in the ballroom. Most of it? Izuku gasped, stumbling backward a little. Does that mean? No. Yagi waved him down. I still have one for all. But I burned through the time limit of how long I can remain in my powered-up form. Normally I can do up to 3 hours a day, but now I'm down to 2 hours, maybe even less. Izuku was at a loss for words. The end of All Might's era was coming faster than he thought. They heard someone gasp behind them, and turned their heads towards the office entrance to see Mirio's face sticking out of the door. Their eyes locked onto each other, and fear gripping their hearts. Mirio phased the rest of his body through the door, while Izuku threw up his hands. "Wait, it's not what you think. He's sick," they both shouted in unison. They blinked at each other, realizing what they just said. "Wait, you know too?" They spoke in unison again. Despite the situation, Yagi chuckled as he slowly sat himself up. "Don't worry yourselves. It's kind of the reason why I invited the both of you here to Island." Mirio and Midoriya appeared confused. "Huh. Well, I wanted to introduce the two of you to each other because of my quirk," Yagi explained. "Mirio, Izuku is the new inheritor of One for All." "Izuku, Mirio was originally my first choice." The two boys stared at each other in astonishment. Yagi laughed again. "Yeah, awkward, right?" Island's central tower rooftop. Endeavor landed on the roof as the flames around his feet dissipated. The first thing he laid his eyes on was the dead body, with most of the upper half of his face reduced to red mush. A deep frown formed on his face as he made his way over to the edge of the roof and gazed down at the carnage below. His hands balled themselves into fists as fire formed around them. It had become clear to the Flame Hero that this vigilante, no, this abomination was a threat to the security of Japan, and if left unchecked, there was no telling what kind of horrors he would inflict upon the populace. Enji's mind was made up. He was taking that monster down, dead or alive. Turning around, he spotted a series of bloody footprints along with a trail of blood leading to a destroyed section of the roof. He jumped down through the hole into the hallway below and followed the trail. He followed the footprints down several floors for the next several minutes until he came into an office with an adjacent medical lab. He entered the lab and found Hawks and Maruko currently unconscious. Hawks was slumped against the counter while Maruko lay across an operating table. Narrowing his eyes suspiciously at the two heroes, Endeavor noticed the footprints leading out of the office and back into the hallway. He callously left the room and the heroes behind, without even checking to see if they were alive, and continued to follow the trail. The flames around him grew hotter as he picked up the pace. He was eager to put an end to this. Island's central tower, the vault. The doomslayer walked through the set of heavy steel doors that had been melted through with magma. He entered the room and took a moment to take in how huge it was. It was a circular room with a high ceiling and a collection of monitors and keyboards at the other end of the room, most likely used for unlocking the lockers. In fact, the entire room was lined with small locker doors that could easily number in the hundreds. There had to be some really useful support items in these lockers, but he would let Vega choose the right ones. He glanced down at the melted skeletal remains on the left side of the room. Was it a hostage? Shit, did he miss one? It is, or rather used to be, Samuel Abraham. When you defeated Nine and his lieutenants, Curator ordered Volcano to dispose of Samuel once they had the quirk amplification headset. I eavesdropped on their conversations via hacking through their communications. No biggie then. At least it was a traitorous backstabber that got melted, not an innocent. He walked over to the monitor, which showed the list of supports items within the lockers. Scanning. There are 2 support items that we can utilize. Opening the lockers now. Wait, only 2 out of the hundreds of goodies all around them? If it were up to him, he'd pillage the whole damn vault. He heard 2 lockers open and went up the stairs that led up to the wall. The first open locker he came up to contained a cluster of cylindrical devices connected by green tubes and colored orange with several gray buttons located on the sides. This support item has the capability of fusing any object or material at the atomic level. Its applications will be beneficial when I make some adjustments. The Hellwalker plucked the support item out of its container and placed it in his Hammerspace backpack. Not sure what Vega had in store for this item, but he trusted the AI's judgment. He went over to the second locker and noticed the one next to it was wide open. Must have been for the headset the LOV stole earlier. He reached inside the locker and pulled out a large, rectangular case that was made of a sleek, carbon fiber material. He inspected the device, curious as to how this particular support item functioned. There was a small keypad on the side, but there weren't any compartments, slots, or any visible sign that it could open. How did this thing work? That is an advanced, portable 3D printer. Inspired by a quirk belonging to a pro hero from New Zealand, it can easily construct anything regardless of size or density 10 times faster than any normal 3D printer. It also uses fewer materials, making this an indispensable support item. The Slayer nodded and stashed it away. All objectives completed. We are now free to exfiltrate from my island. The Doomslayer felt a sense of accomplishment upon hearing that. His mission here was, in his opinion, a success. The Steel Sabers had been wiped out. He nabbed some useful support items. And most important of all, the hostages and heroes had been safely rescued with 0 fatalities. Although the League of Villains managed to escape, he had denied them the opportunity to steal the headset and eliminated some of their members. All in all, a good day's work. He walked back down the stairs and headed over to the entrance. Incoming hero. No sooner did the Slayer stop in the middle of the room when Endeavor came into view from the right and stood in the opening of the melted doors. The Doomslayer was impressed that the number 2 hero was still standing after he royally trounced him back at the port. Engie glared at the vigilante hatefully until he noticed the skeleton nearby, and his lips curled into an angry snarl. The Slayer guessed Engie didn't know the corpse belonged to a man who sided with the LOV and thought he was a dead hostage. And a long, drawn-out fight over a misunderstanding. Fire fist. A surge of searing fire blasted outwards from Endeavor and raised the temperature of his flames to a white-hot point. With the density of his flames engulfing his body, Endeavor clenched his fists as his fire beard surged intensely. The Hellwalker did not move. Jet burn. The flame hero reared his fist back and launched a fiery beam at the Slayer, hitting him dead center in the chest. But it didn't melt his armor, let alone stagger him. There was no damage whatsoever. Momentarily shocked, Engie prepared another attack. Ignited arrow. He threw an oversized arrow made of fire at the Slayer, and it harmlessly impacted off his armor, dissipating in the process. Endeavor was growing frustrated as the flames around him grew larger. This was not happening. Nobody was impervious to his flames. Hell Spider. Endeavor summoned thin trails of fiery strings from his fingertips and lashed them at the Bane of Hell. The whips cut through anything in its path while errantly hitting the lockers, detonating some of the more volatile support items in a destructive chain reaction. The whips cracked themselves against the Doomslayer's suit to 0 effect. He kept standing where he was like a statue, unmoving and uncaring. Endeavor retracted his whips after several more seconds of fruitless lashings. He ground his teeth together in rage as his temper reached its boiling point. Hell's Curtain. Endeavor threw his hands out and a blanket of flames surged towards the Doomslayer like water and covered his body with fire that was hot enough to melt the steel floor and anything else made of metal. But Engie followed up with another attack. Hellfire Storm. A whirlwind of fire erupted from beneath the Slayer and nearly consumed the entire room as it formed into a raging miniature tornado of hellfire. The heat coming from the flame twister melted the lockers and destroyed the support items inside them, destroying valuable pieces of equipment for heroes everywhere. The Flaminado continued to whirl its destructive power upon its target until it started to die down. Endeavor held his breath, but was fully confident that with his combined usage of his move set, he finished off the vigilante. And boy was he in for a shock when the flames disappeared to reveal the vigilante. Even after being consumed by flames, there wasn't a single singe on his armor and was still standing after everything that was just thrown at him. Engie's eye twitched as he reached the end of his rope. He charged up his flames again, this time to their highest level as he leveled a death glare at his target. The Doomslayer could see the bloodlust behind Endeavor's eyes. Engie brought his hands together and formed a ball of white-hot fire in his hands. It grew in size as the air distorted from the heat and glowed brighter. Once it reached its peak, Endeavor let loose his most strongest attack. Prominence. Engie fired a massive, concentrated beam of heat from his hands that completely engulfed the Doomslayer. The size and strength of the beam were almost powerful enough to be on par with the Gauss cannon's siege mode blast as it vaporized everything in its path and tore a hole right through the wall behind its target. It melted through the reinforced structure of the central tower as it continued to travel through the air until it burned out before it could strike a building back on the mainland. Engie breathed heavily as his assault was finished, steam rising from his body. His beard and eyebrows were still aflame, but he had exhausted himself from using so many of his moves on top of his most powerful one. Smoke clouded the room until the giant hole became visible at the other end of the vault. The smokescreen continued to slowly dissipate as Enji regained his composure and posture. But then something came into view as the smoke vanished. Endeavor's eyes bulged out of their sockets as he choked back a gasp. The unbreakable doomslayer is still alive. Untouched, unhurt, and unstoppable. The Slayer had tanked Endeavor's signature move without even lifting a finger, just to show how utterly ineffective it was against him. The Doomslayer's armor was designed to withstand the very fires of hell itself. Enji's flames weren't even close. The Great Slayer had not budged an inch after everything Endeavor threw at him, and erratic flames dotted around the room only enhanced the aura of invincibility that the Slayer exuded. The Doomslayer wiped off the non-existent soot off of his right shoulder just to fuck with the flame hero. Endeavor's legs shook as he stared at the vigilante in shock. This had to be some kind of sick joke the universe was playing on him. This was impossible. How was this man still standing? How? But then Enji experienced something he had tried to bury within his mind a long time ago. Helplessness. That same feeling that brought him to his knees when he saw the massive gap of power between him and All Might. He was facing something that made him feel weak and puny, just like All Might. Another hurdle he could never hope to jump over. He imagined himself in a rocky wasteland with a large chasm spanning the length of the desert. On the other side stood the vigilante. But standing next to him was his rival All Might, hands on his hips and laughing boisterously as if to remind Endeavor that he could never surpass him. That he could never surpass either of them. It was the sole reason why he wanted Shoto to become the symbol of peace, so he could never fall victim to that dark pit of despair and helplessness, just like when he lost his father when he was still a teenager. Enji Todoroki snapped. Endeavor flew into a berserker rage as he charged at the Doomslayer. His fists became wreathed in fire and unleashed a barrage of explosive punches against the vigilante as soon as he closed the distance. Each punch released bursts of flame upon the vigilante. Endeavor swung his fists wildly in fury. The armored plates around his knuckles began to crack and bend, but Endeavor was so furious he paid it no heed as he continued to strike the Slayer across the face. His brutal assault seemed to be working as the impact of his blows was forcing the vigilante backward. But to clarify, Enji was not gaining any kind of advantage against the Slayer. The Flame Hero's punches were comparable to hitting the Bane of Hell with a pillow. Endeavor was not forcing the Doomslayer back. He was purposefully walking backward to make it look like the hero was winning. The Doomslayer could tell that Endeavor had an ego the size of a space station. When he wore the crown of the Night Sentinels, he was in charge of training new recruits. Most of them were very vocal about his position and thought they could easily best him. He proved them wrong every single time by using a simple, two-step training method. Step 1 consisted of him allowing his overconfident opponents to land a few good hits on him just to make them think they were above him. Endeavor then tackled the Slayer into the destroyed monitors and pinned him against the wall with his arm. He slammed his other fist against the side of the vigilante's helmet repeatedly as he snarled in frustration like an amorous baboon. Suddenly, the Slayer's arms shot up and grabbed Endeavor by the wrists. He slowly pried them away from him while overpowering the hero with ease. Endeavor struggled with all of his might, no pun intended, but the vigilante's grip was like a vice. He couldn't free himself at all. The vigilante's strength was inhuman. And thus began Step 2. Humbling his opponent. The Doomslayer instantly released Endeavor's wrists and swiftly punched him right in the throat. Gaya Akuk. Endeavor sputtered as he clutched his neck with both hands. Hunched over, he staggered away from the Slayer while trying his hardest to breathe. The Doomslayer slowly advanced toward the reeling hero with a menacing posture as his opponent coughed uncontrollably. The Flame Hero desperately threw a punch at the Slayer, but he parried the blow and delivered a straight punch to the face followed by another to his stomach, snapping one of his ribs. Pain shot through Enji but tried to land another hit on the Slayer only for him to sidestep the clumsy swing and slugged him right in the back. The Slayer parried another punch from the stumbling fool and countered with an uppercut to his jaw and a swift punch to the chest. Endeavor's back hit the wall as his vision grew hazy. He started to hallucinate that he was fighting All Might and in a crazed fury, flung out his left fist at the vigilante, who again parried his attempt and countered him. The doomslayer swung his hand down upon Endeavor's right shoulder in a chopping motion and dislocated his arm at the shoulder. A horrific cracking sound filled the air as Enji screamed in pain, his left arm dangling uselessly. The relentless slayer did not cease his assault and unleashed a 1-2 combo across Endeavor's face, knocking out some of his teeth before uppercutting him in the gut. The wind was knocked out of the flame hero as the doomslayer grabbed him by the neck and delivered a devastating right hook. The blow smashed Enji's head into the wall, and the pulverized hero dropped to the floor. The slayer stood over Endeavor and noted that despite all of the damage he inflicted upon him, he could still move. But when the Hellwalker noticed Endeavor grab a shard of jagged metal from the ground, he frowned in disgust. Endeavor lurched upwards and swung the blade at the doomslayer with a roar, only to have him grab his wrist and twisted it hard enough to force him to drop the metal shard. The slayer caught the shiv as it fell and swiped it across the right side of Endeavor's face, barely missing his eye. Blood sprayed across Taggart's visor as it gushed from the open wound before he plunged the shard into Endeavor's left shoulder. The doomslayer socked an agonized Endeavor with a left hook to the side of his head, spinning the hero around and striking the back of his head with an open palm blow. He spun the dazed hero around, grabbed the back of his neck, and swung his knee upward into his face with enough force to shatter his nose. The doomslayer then hefted Endeavor up in the air with both of his hands, held him over his head, and slammed him down into the ground hard enough to leave a crater on the steel floor. The slayer stood victoriously over the flame hero, who had now been reduced to a bloody pulp. Enji was completely unconscious and would not be waking up anytime soon. Observing his beaten adversary on the ground reminded him of his days back on Dnur. Argent Dnur Night Sentinel Training Grounds. Many eons ago, Flynn Taggart sent the young shirtless advocate tumbling across the floor with a haymaker as the other trainees watched on. The circular arena located outside of the Night Sentinel Grand Hall offered a glorious view of the Dnurian forests, with the titanic world spear visible beyond the mountain range. The afternoon sun shone down on the bruised face of the overconfident trainee who thought he could take on the legendary Doomslayer himself. Foolish, overconfident, brazen, and obviously short a few brain cells. Make no mistake, these will lead you to an early grave if you don't learn to rid yourself of these shackles. Taggart addressed the downed youth and the other applicants outside the ring to an extent. You must become disciplined and resourceful if you ever want to walk alongside the Sentinels. The advocate he just beat up slowly sat himself up, nursing his bloody nose with a humiliated frown. Taggart knelt on one knee and extended a hand. Humility is painful, but in the end, you will appreciate it when it shows you that you can rise above your shortcomings. Only then will you become a true warrior of the Night Sentinels. The rookie's eyes lit up with clarity, experiencing an epiphany as he grasped Flynn's hand. Island's central tower, the vault. Present day. Still looking down at Endeavor, the Doomslayer came to a disappointing conclusion that the hero would probably never learn from his mistakes. If he ever recovered, then it would mean that he would hold a grudge against him, and it will be an issue sometime in the future. Oh well, he would just have to kick his ass again. Maybe that'll teach Endeavor to understand his place on the food chain. Looking over to the circular hole in the wall created from Enji's previous attack, the Slayer realized now he had a convenient exit to leave the tower and Sunai Island. Hopefully without anyone noticing. Slayer, I am detecting a large number of pro-heroes converging near the tower. Your escape route has been blocked off. You may need to physically remove them from your path. The Doomslayer rolled his eyes. Nothing was ever easy. Truth be told, he didn't want to fight the heroes, but maybe he could intimidate them into letting him go. He glared back down at Endeavor's prone form, grabbed him by the neck, and dragged him towards the hole. The Slayer trudged through the melted entryway until he stood at the end, taking in the sight of the ruined cityscape below. Far out on the horizon beyond the ocean, he could make out a speck of light in the distance. Morning had finally come. They certainly didn't call it the land of the rising sun for nothing. He jumped from the hole and plummeted downwards towards the blood-flooded street below while still clutching Endeavor. To be continued. Chapter 21. The Immeasurable. Is this the best you can offer? I could kill you all with my bare hands, but it would prove nothing. I came for sport, the thrill of the hunt. I was told this realm offered fierce and worthy combatants. I was deceived. You have nothing to offer me. You have been a pathetic waste of my time. Today is not a good day. Battle Beast, Invincible. Island Main Airport. Several minutes earlier. In dire situations, heroes must always keep their cool and maintain a level head to ensure their job is done. Quick thinking and teamwork are paramount to saving the day, as heroes usually do. But this unique situation was challenging them to a sizable degree. The pro-heroes were currently in a back-and-forth discussion about what they should do now. Either guard the hostages and hold down the fort for reinforcements, or assist Endeavor in apprehending the vigilante. It's clear that we need to capture that sociopath as soon as possible. We cannot let him escape. Concert announced to the group. You all saw what he's capable of. The Steel Sabers unloaded every bullet, explosive, and tank they had at him. Nothing can survive any of that. But he did, and the man just kept coming after them. I don't even want to think about what'll happen if this guy walks away from all this. Kunoichi Glider, the number 4 pro-hero of America, recounted as images of the bloody massacre popped up in her mind. Do we know what kind of quirk he has? Salam asked the Japanese pro-heroes. Such horrific brutality could have only been caused by a powerful quirk. Present Mike gulped uncomfortably. Eraser tried shutting down his quirk, but nothing happened. We think he may be quirkless. Before anyone could react with dread, Aizawa immediately raised his hand. Hold up, I don't think it's that cut and dry now that I've shaken off my initial shock. There are only 2 ways that somebody can be resistant to my quirk. Either they have a mutation quirk, something I can't erase, or if I can't directly see the said person. We believe that suit he's wearing somehow renders my ability ineffective against him. But then how is he able to pull weapons out of thin air? Big Red wondered. I mean, you can't deny that it has to be a Chu dash. It could also be another factor of his suit, but it's only a hypothesis. We still know very little about him. Cementos answered. Right now we need to make a plan on how to capture him. Elecplant stated the obvious. The sooner we lock him up in Tartarus, the better. Not to worry, we've got that covered. Midnight assured as she gestured to herself, Loud Cloud, and Cementos. We bind him, take off his helmet, and then hit him with my strongest somnambulist formula to knock him out. We used that tactic once on a rowdy villain with a Megalodon quirk. Loud Cloud smiled, fond of that particular memory. If we play our cards right, we can take this guy down for good. But we must not let overconfidence cloud our focus. This man was capable of taking down 5 of us on his own. Edshot warned. Yes, we were caught off guard before, but that makes him no less dangerous. True, but we do have an advantage over him. Gran Torino said. We have numbers on our side. The Steel Sabers were many, but only their superiors were quirk users. We all have powerful quirks and years of experience under our belts. There's no way he can fight all of us. But what if it's not enough to stop him? Pixie Bob nervously asked. Everyone stared at each other with uncertainty, unable to find an answer. That is, everyone except Yoroi Musha, who decided to put his foot down. The more time we waste here, the more time the vigilante has to escape. We cannot stand around pondering on what-ifs. The samurai hero spoke with a serious, lecturing tone. We must decide now. Again there was silence. The aged hero was right. The clock was ticking. Everyone glanced at each other again, but this time they felt a swell of bravery and confidence rise amongst them. Their minds were made up. Tonight, this psycho goes down. Let's do this. Death Arms cracked his knuckles eagerly. If that's the case, then I elect myself to stay behind while the rest of you apprehend the vigilante. Slide and Go valiantly volunteered as he jabbed his thumb at himself. Just you. 13 questioned out of concern. Well, let's face it, my quirk isn't made for offense, and someone has to look after the hostages and Ragdoll. Slide and Go reasoned, that smile never leaving his face. Kunoichi Glider heard him mention her friend. Ragdoll, what happened to her? Is she okay? The ninja squirrel heroine asked the remaining pussycats. She and Ragdoll were pen pals who chatted with each other every chance they could. They would always swap stories with one another, and she was worried for her friend's well-being. Her answer came from Pixie Bob, Mandalay, and Tiger looking away with saddened expressions. We'll stay back here as well. The civilians need all the protection they can get. Wash raised his hand as Kesajiri Man, Yuwabami, and Airjet stood alongside him. Kamui Woods cleared his throat. While I agree with our current plan, Let's not forget that Endeavour dash. There was a loud noise akin to a battleship cannon firing its payload that made everyone in the airport jump out of their skin. A massive beam of superheated fire streaked over the airport, the occupants looking up at the hole in the bulkhead above them to see it sail over their heads. What on earth was that? Fourth kind yelled. That was Endeavor's prominence burn. X-less identified. He only ever uses it as a last resort. Looks like that vigilante is giving him more trouble than we thought. Eraserhead figured as he slipped on his goggles. Let's move out. The pro heroes ran out of the atrium in a large group, ready to put an end to this ordeal once and for all. Tiger stopped at the door as the others vacated the room and turned to Slide and Go. You'll keep them and Ragdoll safe? Slide and Go puffed out his chest with his hands on his hips, pure determination burning in his eyes. I'll defend them to my last breath. Tiger gave him a thumbs up. You're a saint, Tatsuyuki. He left the atrium to catch up with the heroes as the civilians began cheering for their saviors. As soon as everyone left and the heroes who stayed behind got to work, a devilish smile formed on Slide and Go's lips. Could these heroes be any more stupid? Tatsuyuki wasn't guarding the hostages out of bravery or valor. He was staying as far away from that lunatic as possible. If that man was able to slaughter the most dangerous mercenary force on the planet, a group that made even Redestro wary of them, then what could a small army of pro-heroes hope to accomplish? Honestly, he wouldn't be surprised if Endeavor himself couldn't beat him. By staying here with the civilians, he'd be saving his ass so he could relay vital information for the Meta Liberation Army when this was all over. He already knew there'd be no stopping Redestro from trying to entice the man into joining the ranks of the MLA, but there was a nagging thought in the back of Tatsuyuki's mind. What if he didn't want to join and they were next? Tiger joined back up with the others as they neared the main exit. Suddenly, a giant construction mech burst straight through the exit like it was made of cheap plywood. The heroes jumped back as debris nearly missed them by inches. The mech shone its headlights at them, nearly blinding some of the heroes in the process as it flexed its remaining hydraulic claw at them menacingly. Power Loader's eyes widened when he recognized the mech as one of his prototypes. What in the... He gawked as he got a better look. That's one of my patents. How is it moving on its own? Relax, I got this. MT Lady quickly said as she grew to her full height. The ceiling was high enough to accommodate her size, and caught the machine's claw when it swung at her. She grappled with its appendage and slammed her foot into its midsection. The mech tumbled backward, giving Yoroi Musha an opening to leap in and form his hands into katana blades. He jumped high into the air and swung his blade hands down upon the mech, slicing it into two halves with perfectly clean cuts. No time for interruptions. Yoroi Musha remarked as his hands changed back to normal and the remains of the mech toppled to the ground. Everyone ran past the downed automaton and out of the airport as you shrunk herself back down, following them afterward. Power Loader lagged behind, despairing at the sight of one of his desecrated inventions. May would weep if she ever saw this. But then he noticed that the claw and wheels of his mech were completely coated in blood. There was even a severed arm lodged in the hydraulics. As much as Power Loader wanted to dread the possibility of the vigilante altering his patent's protocols to kill rather than help, he saved it for later and ran as fast as he could to catch up with the others. Through the heavily destroyed construction mech, Vega watched him leave. The AI wanted to buy the Slayer some time to escape, but since Endeavor slowed him down, it was a foregone strategy. He would have to relay the situation to the doomslayer ASAP. Island Yin route to Central Tower. As the pro-heroes ran through the streets, their resolve was crumbling at the sight of each bloody massacre they passed on their way to the tower. Dear God, are you seeing this? Jesus Christ. Sweet Lord, he butchered these guys. No, there's no way one man could have done all of this. Is that Brain? Oh man, I think I see Brain. He killed them all. Oh God. This is a nightmare. But only the Japanese heroes were panicking. The international heroes had already seen the slaughter on the ballroom monitor when this insanity started, so they had plenty of time to adjust to the horrors around them. But it was still a horrific sight to bear, and it only seemed to get worse as they went on. After several minutes of running past the bodies of the dead mercenaries, they reached the bridge that led to the central quadrant of Island and found it littered with the ruined, melted husks of what used to be a column of tanks. The international heroes proceeded to cross the bridge only to stop when they noticed the Japanese heroes were lagging behind. They were all hunched over or staring in shock at the killing fields behind them. Some of the more sensitive ones were vomiting over the bridge while some leaned against the support beams with thousand-yard stares. "What are you all doing, amigos?" El Magnifico Matador called out to them. "We have to keep moving." Vlad King, propped up against a light post and staring down at the ground, held up a shaky hand. "GGG, give us a minute." "A minute? Dang it, we don't have time for this." Cow Lady chided as she stomped over to Vlad and grabbed him by the arm. "Y'all need to cowboy up and dash." The blood hero instantly wrestled himself away from Cow Lady, nearly knocking her over as he raised a hand, as if to strike her. "I said give us a fucking dash." He stopped himself when he noticed that everyone was regarding him with shocked expressions while Cow Lady was surprised by his outburst. Ashamed, Sekijiro lowered his hand and walked away from her with his head hung low. Feeling pity for the poor souls and knowing that the others needed time to collect themselves, the international heroes continued ahead but remained confident that they would catch up. They crossed the bridge and waded through the river of blood and corpses until they neared the tower. The Crimson Lake had receded into the storm drains, making it easier for everyone to navigate through. Up there, Feng Huang gazed upwards at the left side of the tower, which had smoke emanating from it. "That must be where that beam came from. What's our plan of attack?" Pancration asked as he adjusted his cestus. "Should we split up or go in as a group?" "Splitting up wouldn't do us much good. We should all go in together," Mr. Plastic suggested. "But getting up there isn't going to be a walk in the park. That tower's got to be well over 200 floors dash." "Look!" Dame Moto exclaimed as she pointed up at the tower. The heroes saw something leap from the hole high up in the tower and plummet to the ground. As it continued to fall downward, the international heroes saw that it was the vigilante himself holding some kind of object with him. They all ran as fast as they could towards the left side of the building while traversing around the wreckage of the Sabres APCs as well as their dead bodies. The Doomslayer's fall continued to increase in velocity as the ground grew closer until he landed on the street with so much force it created a miniature shockwave upon impact. Doom 2016 Argent Energy. The force of the landing knocked over several destroyed APCs and displaced the blood around him, draining the street while cracking apart the asphalt. He stood back up and walked out of the crater he created with the unconscious Endeavor still in his grasp. Soon, a group of heroes entered the area and stopped a distance away from him. They were highly unnerved by the blood covering his armor, and some gasped at the sight of the number 2 pro hero of Japan reduced to a bloody pulp. The Doomslayer glared at the heroes while taking note of their odd costume choices. Well, they wouldn't be heroes if they didn't have bizarre articles of clothing. Vega was nice enough to give him a quick rundown of each hero in order. The first group on his left consisted of a man with a lion's head wearing a turquoise wetsuit with fish scale patterns. Merlion Hero Big Red. Current rank, number 1 pro hero of Singapore. Quirk. Tidal bore allows him to fire jets of pressured water out of his mouth, as well as the ability to breathe underwater. Next to him was a literal walking pictogram who looked like he jumped straight out of ancient Egypt, and his body was paper thin. Hieroglyph Hero Salam. Current rank, number 1 pro hero of Egypt. Quirk. Papyrus Salam's body is thin as paper, giving him enhanced speed due to his weightlessness and the added ability to easily dodge attacks by shifting his two-dimensional body. To the Lion Man's left was a shapely woman with curly blonde hair, wearing a white tank top and short skirt, which were both colored white. She wore armor-like attachments that resembled motorcycle parts along with an elongated helmet, all colored purple. Motorcycle Heroine Dame Moto. Current rank, number 1 pro hero of France. Quirk. Harley-Davidson Moto can grow motorcycle parts out of her body, giving her access to hard-hitting attacks or an increase in agility. Behind them was a heavily muscled man dressed up in a red and white Greek tunic and a headband along with studded yellow cestus on both hands that made him look a little bit like Hercules from Greek legend. Herculean Hero Pancration. Current rank, number 1 pro hero of Greece. Quirk. Hercules able to increase the size and density of his muscles to grant him enhanced strength. The second group consisted of 4 heroes. One was a man wearing an all-black bodysuit, helmet, and red cape that were adorned with lightning bolt patterns. Shocking Hero Elecplant. Current rank, Number 2 Pro Hero of America. Quirk. Thunderbolt capable of emitting powerful bolts of lightning from his hands, reaching up to 5 million megajoules. A woman wearing skimpy cowgirl attire had 2 large horns growing out of the sides of her head, while the other shorter woman next to her was dressed up as a ninja and had squirrel ears along with a tail to boot. Country Girl Heroine Cow Lady. Current rank. Number 3 Pro Hero of America. Quirk. Taurus gives her the ability to transform into a powerful Minotaur-esque hybrid. Ninja Squirrel Heroine Kunoichi Glider. Current rank. Number 4 Pro Hero of America. Quirk. Sugar Glider. She can unfurl the flaps underneath her arms to allow herself to glide through the air akin to a flying squirrel. Also skilled in ninjutsu. The last member of the group was a tall juggernaut of a man wearing Native American warrior garb and had the head of an eagle complete with war paint and a headdress. Clutched in his hands were a pair of steel tomahawks, while 2 massive wings grew from his back. Native American Hero Apache Hurricane. Current rank. Number 5 Pro Hero of America. Quirk. Eagle. Grants him the ability to fly and unleash strong gusts of winds. The last group of pro heroes started with an aged man wearing a red conductor's outfit and holding a baton in his hand. Conductor Hero Concert. Current rank. Number 1 Pro Hero of Russia. Quirk. Symphony Concert can summon musical notes out of thin air to batter opponents or unleash sound waves to lull them to sleep. He can also create enlarged musical instruments that have a variety of combative uses. The one standing next to him wore a black and red bullfighter's outfit along with a domino mask with his black hair done up in bull horns, clutching a thin saber in his hand. Bullfighter Hero El Magnifico Matador. Current rank. Number 1 Pro Hero of Spain. Quirk. Flash Step can instantaneously move at super high-speed motion. The 2 women in the group consisted of a woman with long blonde hair, compound eyes, insect antennae, transparent wings located on her back, and a black ensemble dress with white stockings. The wrist guard she wore had a black and yellow pattern similar to a bee, and her nails were as sharp as knives. Wasp Heroine X. Current rank. Number 1 Pro Hero of Germany. Quirk. Queen Bee gives her the properties of a common wasp, such as releasing pollen to disorient opponents, flight, and firing stingers from her fingertips. The other one wore a red and green cheongsam dress with a ponytail and red-eye makeup. Her black hair was tied up in a ponytail, and around her neck was a plumage of brightly colored feathers. Firebird Heroine Feng Wang. Current rank. Number 1 Pro Hero of China. Quirk. Jade Phoenix. Can summon wings from her back that allow her to fly, throw gouts of multicolored flame, and fire jade feathers. A shirtless man with black paints, a light blue visor, spiky silver hair, and dark red boots wore comically oversized arm guards along with red-colored gauntlets. Rubber Hero Mr. Plastic. Current rank. Number 1 Pro Hero of England. Quirk. Elasticity Mr. Plastic's body is naturally malleable, giving him the ability to stretch and contort his body at will. The last member of the group was clad in Sudanese tribal clothes and bits of armor covering them, as well as a riveted mask covering his face. His hair was branch-like, and he held a katana at his side. Soul Hero Nikang. Current rank. Number 1 Pro Hero of Sudan. Quirk. Spirit Transfer can send fragments of his soul to possess inanimate objects, bending and commanding them to his will. So the top-ranked heroes from around the world thought they could take him on? That almost got him to chuckle. But then the Japanese heroes caught up with the rest of the team and now stood alongside them. Their jaws fell open when they saw the bloodied form of Endeavor being held by his neck. They were stunned silent. The man looked like he had been thrown into a wood chipper. The doomslayer held up Enji's body for all to see, many of them wincing at the sight of his dislocated arm and the vertical cut along his face. The Hellwalker then flung Endeavor to his right, the hero smashing through the window of a souvenir shop and into the display case. The heroes immediately took several steps backward with expressions of fright written all over their faces. The Bane of Hell could easily see the dread radiating from the pro heroes as they backed away from him. Shaking hands, trembling legs, feet stained with blood, beads of sweat, wide eyes, they had received a taste of real fear for what was probably the first time in their careers. He continued to stare at them while standing still, hoping this display of might would be enough to convince them to back off and let him go. Stay where you are? You're under arrest. The Lekplint yelled as he pointed at the doomslayer. The slayer did not react. His silence unnerved the other heroes, but they remained steadfast. We're giving you one chance to surrender. We won't give you a second warning. Yoroi Musha tightened his fists as he stepped forward, his voice authoritative and commanding. We're not letting you go after what you did. Nobody had to die here. Ryukyu yelled as the others regained their nerves. Contrary to what Ryukyu claimed, he did the world a favor by killing the Steel Sabers. One way or another, the only way you are leaving this island is in handcuffs. Big Red determinedly proclaimed. This insanity stops here and now dash. The Doomslayer suddenly extended his arm, and everyone activated their quirks out of panic, thinking that it was some kind of attack. However, it wasn't. His hand outstretched in a stop gesture, the Slayer slowly shook his head at the heroes. They did not want this fight, and he did not want to hurt them unless he had no other alternative. The Doomslayer lowered his hand, turned around, and started walking away from them down the blood-stained street, the lamppost above him shorting out and obscuring half his body in darkness. Now, Cementos slammed both of his fists into the ground, and a massive surge of cement exploded outward, nearly knocking everyone over. As the tidal wave rushed towards the Slayer, Loud Cloud and Midnight ran alongside the wave. The Cloud hero formed a basketball-sized cloud in his hands and held it out to Midnight, who tore off a chunk of the fabric around her hand. A miasma of smoke emanated from her hand, now jet black instead of the usual purple, and Midnight then shoved her hand into the cloud just as the cement engulfed the Doomslayer's legs. Holding the cloud ball containing Midnight's knockout gas, Loud Cloud threw it up into the air, summoned a large cloud to ride on, and raced toward the immobilized vigilante. A surge of hands made of cement emerged from the ground, wrapped their fingers around the Slayer's helmet, and forcefully yanked it off just as four walls shot out of the ground and surrounded the Doomslayer. With the vigilante fully boxed in, Loud Cloud jumped off of the cloud he was riding on like a springboard, caught the cloud bomb out of the air, and slam-dunked it right into the trap. A cement cover rapidly formed over the enclosed structure just as the cloud bomb exploded at the vigilante's feet, releasing Midnight's enhanced aroma around him just as he was completely sealed in. Landing on the ground just as Midnight caught up with him, Oboro stood up and stared at the concrete coffin intensely. Everyone else shared the same look as they all slowly approached the vigilante's prison. They're still on edge and cautious, never easing up or letting their guard down as they drew nearer. They halted a few feet away from the container as Cementos crept up to it and pressed the side of his head against it. He listened closely while everyone held their breaths. "I don't hear him moving," he said to his fellow heroes. Nobody moved, keeping their guard up and their quirks at the ready. After a full minute of hearing nothing, Cementos exhaled in relief as he stepped away from the container, wiping the sweat off his rocky brow. "We got him." Everyone let out the breaths they were holding in and relaxed, happy that they had finally stopped the insane madman. Several heroes gathered around Loud Cloud, Midnight, and Cementos to congratulate them, while a few rushed into the souvenir shop to help Endeavor. "That was an excellent strategy. I'm impressed." Apache Hurricane shook Oboro's hand. "Well, it was the only one we could think up of, but hey, it worked in the end." Loud Cloud playfully chuckled as he scratched the back of his head. Unbeknownst to them all, it didn't work. The still-conscious Slayer listened in on them from within his confines as the black fumes wafted around him. He could not understand what they were saying since he needed his helmet to help him translate Japanese. But it didn't take a genius to know that the heroes had planned a strategy for him if he didn't surrender. It was a smart, admirable tactic they thought up, but against someone like him? Not possible. He remembered studying the multiple different heroes during his exploration of Mizutofu and recalled reading up on Midnight's quirk. Eons of being exposed to the noxious gases of the Dark Realm had him build up an immunity to all known types of harmful gas. Her quirk didn't even lull him to sleep in the slightest, or even so much as tickle his nostrils. It was just perfume to him. The Doomslayer clenched and unclenched his hands in frustration when it became clear to him that he was going to have to fight his way off Island. He wished there was another way, but these heroes weren't going to let him walk away, leaving him with an option he did not want to use. He had always enjoyed reading about superheroes when he was a kid back on his Earth, and now here he was, about to pummel the once fictional idols he looked up to. Although their willingness to do their jobs despite the horrors around them was impressive, he wasn't going to surrender himself and be sent to Tartarus prison. Sighing silently through his nose, the great slayer resigned himself to what he had to do next. He admired the heroes for their bravery, but they did not earn his compliance. Meanwhile, the heroes had spread out around the area. One group was looking over Endeavor's injuries while the two groups were discussing how to contact the JSDF. Midnight stood next to the makeshift sarcophagus, holding the Slayer's helmet in her hands and staring at the odd symbol upon it, while Ectoplasm stood next to her. "I've never seen anything like this before," Ectoplasm commented as he tried to guess what the symbol meant. "Neither do I. Not sure if he designed it himself or if it has any ties to whatever it might be based on," Namiri admitted. "But I bet Sir Knight I would love to study this. Either way, once we strip him of his armor and send him to Tartarus, we'll know more about him soon enough." Ectoplasm nervously looked at the container. And what kind of cell are they going to put him in? Will it be strong enough to hold him? He thought. He walked back over to the group, who just finished formulating a plan. "I presume we're storming the tower?" "Yeah, though some of us will have to stay down here and guard our captive." Eraserhead nodded before looking towards the container. "Speaking of whom, did anyone see his face?" Everyone shook their heads, causing Aizawa to frown in annoyance. "If it helps, we'll be able to identify him once we have him under lock and key," Majestic offered, lifting up his hat a little. "I'm more concerned about what happened to Hawks and Maruko. I wouldn't worry about them too much," Midnight assured him with a smile. "If those two are in the top 10, then I think they're going to be just fine. Doom Eternal Cultist Base." The Doomslayer's hand burst forth from the coffin and grabbed Midnight by the face. "Midnight!" Eraserhead shouted as the heroes gasped. Another hand shot out of the container and grabbed her arm, destroying the frontal portion of his confines as he dragged Midnight into the darkness as her muffled screams filled the air. The pro-heroes flew into full-on panic mode and stampeded towards the cement trap, with one group dropping Endeavor to the ground. The Doomslayer exploded out of his prison and charged towards the heroes, his helmet back on his head and carrying a knocked-out Midnight by her hair. He flung the unconscious heroine at Tiger, who instinctively caught her only for the Slayer to sock him across the face and send him flying into a group of heroes. Snipe let loose with his pistols while Xless fired his eye laser at him, but he easily tanked their attacks, grabbed the laser hero by the head, and forcefully turned him towards Snipe. The still-firing laser zapped the revolvers out of Snipe's hands, and the Slayer followed up by smashing Xless' head right into Snipe's mask. He kicked them away from him, and just as they collided into an upturned APC, he looked up just in time to see a titanic woman who towered over him raise her fist above her head. "Basteo aired." MT Lady roared as she slammed her fist down upon him, but he leaped out of the way, jumped up onto her hand, double-jumped off of it towards her abdomen, and threw a punch so hard it sent her sailing across the street, right into a building. The Doomslayer fell from the air towards Kimui Woods, who summoned a torrent of tree branches to bind him, but he punched them into splinters and slammed himself into the ground, knocking Kimui off balance. Shinji tried to attack with his branches again, but the Slayer grabbed him by the scruff of his uniform and headbutt him with enough force to break his mask apart and knock him to the ground. "Shinji!" Death Arms exclaimed, and he let out a roar as he charged the Slayer in fury. Death Blow! He threw a punch at him, his fists taking on a rugged cast-iron texture, but the Bane of Hell spun around and caught his fist before uppercutting him right in the jaw. The Slayer grabbed him by the foot and flung him at the stunned heroes, seeing the terror in their eyes. He charged at the frightened superhumans just as Cementos, Gunhead, Snatch, and Best Jeanist sprang into action. "Take him down! Take him down!" Cementos shouted as he and Snatch unleashed a tidal wave of sand and cement at the Doomslayer. At the same time, Gunhead unleashed a hail of keratin bullets from his gauntlets while Beast Jeanist threw a mass of threads at the Slayer in the hopes that he could slow him down. The unstoppable Slayer destroyed the incoming cement pillars and sand waves with his bare fists, while Gunhead's bullets harmlessly bounced off his armor. Jeanist's threads wrapped around the Slayer, but he tore them off of him, grabbed a handful of the string, and yanked it hard enough to send Jeanist flying towards him. "Tsunagu!" Snatch yelled as he, Cementos, and Gunhead stopped their attack to avoid hurting him. Best Jeanist tried to summon a fiber shield to protect himself, but the Slayer clotheslined him in midair and then kicked a slab of cement right at Snatch, knocking down the sand hero. The doomslayer barreled through the concrete barricade, and Gunhead bravely attempted to use his martial arts on him. However, the Slayer grabbed his arm, elbowed him in the face, flipped him over his shoulder into the ground, and then finally punted him across the street. Snatch tried to get up and the slab off of him, but the doomslayer was already upon him, slamming his foot right into Snatch's face and breaking the sand hero's teeth and nose in the process. Genis scrambled back up and tried to bind him again, but the Slayer grabbed his string again and slammed him into the ground repeatedly, like a human yo-yo. He tossed Tsunagu away and charged towards Cementos, who planted his hands to the ground and activated his quirk, his cement shifting the concrete. Concrete kraken. 8 massive tentacles erupted from the street and snaked their way toward the Doomslayer. The tentacles attempted to stab the Slayer with their pointed, drill-like tips, but he swatted them away like they were flies. As the tentacles shattered apart from the Slayer's blows, Cementos tried to retaliate with another cement-based attack, but he was tackled to the ground by the armored berserker. The boogeyman of hell savagely pummeled him across the face with the last blow, knocking the cement hero out. The Doomslayer got up and broke into a full sprint at another group of heroes on the approach. Elecplant, Cow Lady, Apache Hurricane, Dame Moto, El Magnifico Matador, Mr. Plastic, and Pancration led the charge while the other heroes followed from behind. In response, the doomslayer threw several grenades at them which landed at their feet. They promptly flipped out. "Get down!" Mr. Plastic yelled as everyone dove out of the way and to the ground as quickly as they could. Mandalay, who was farthest from the group, noticed something about the grenades, and as soon as she realized what it was, she mentally communicated to the heroes. "Everyone, it's a feint. The pins are still in the dash." She suddenly gasped when she saw the vigilante draw his pistol and aimed it at the bombs. "Oh God, he's going to shoot the grenades." Scatter. The Slayer shot the grenades one by one, each explosion tearing up the street, but not before waiting a second for his opponents to get away a bit. The heroes were able to flee from the deadly blast radius of each bomb, though an unlucky few suffered concussions. He was just about to shoot the last 3 bombs until Apache Hurricane flapped his wings to create a gust of wind that sent the grenades flying toward the Slayer, just as Kunoichi Glider threw her kunai at them. The kunai pierced the grenades, and they exploded right in his face, creating a smoke cloud that obscured him. The other heroes quickly scrambled to aid their concussed comrades, while Mandalay spoke to everyone within her range. "Stay on your toes, everyone. We don't know if dash." The Slayer exploded out of the smoke and socked Mandalay right in the face. She fell to the ground, and the Slayer rounded on Apache Hurricane, who tried to fly away but was grabbed by his feet and thrown to the ground. The pro hero quickly dove out of the way of the Slayer's fist and swung one of his tomahawks at him. The second it shattered against his helmet, the Doomslayer punched him across the face and grabbed him by the neck, headbutting him before throwing him into a light post. Kunoichi Glider swooped in and flung dozens of shurikens at him just as Cow Lady transformed into a minotaur-like humanoid and charged at him. Kunoichi drew her tanto while Cow Lady drew closer, steam billowing from her nostrils as she picked up speed. The ninja thrust her sword down onto the Great Slayer, but the sword snapped in two. Kunoichi Glider hastily tried to fly away, but the Slayer grabbed her by the tail and yanked her right into his fist face first. He tossed the ninja wannabe away and ran towards the still charging Cow Lady, who furiously bellowed in anger. They closed the distance with each other, and the Doomslayer grabbed her by the horns, stopping her dead in her tracks. He then slammed her to the ground multiple times like a ragdoll before throwing her into a building via a spinning hammer throw. An enraged yell from behind alerted him to the Herculean hero coming from behind, his muscles bulging to the point they were almost comically oversized. Pancration threw a left hook at the Slayer, who easily dodged, but did manage to grab the Doomslayer's hands. He grappled with the Slayer, but his far stronger opponent twisted his wrists and then punched him right in the groin. The Hellwalker uppercut him right into a group of heroes who attempted to rush him just as Hound Dog, Yoroi Musha, and Shishido attacked from behind. Howling Fawn, Muramasa no Ejji. Claws of the King. Do these idiots always have to announce the names of their attacks? The Slayer sidestepped to the right to avoid Shishido's claws and elbowed him in the chest, sending the lion hero flying into a car. He turned to face Yoroi Musha, whose fingers had transformed into katana blades, and was now running towards him with impressive speed for his age, while Hound Dog ran alongside him, muzzle torn off and fangs bared. The Doomslayer shattered Yoroi Musha's sword fingers with a backhand, punching Hound Dog in the snout and slugging Yoroi in the chest. The samurai hero grunted in pain as he fell to one knee, while the Slayer threw a haymaker into Ryo's face and sent him crashing into an APC. Yoroi regrew his sword fingers and thrust the blades at the Doomslayer, who dodged the blow and delivered a chop to his neck before finishing him off with an open palm strike to his face. As Yoroi collapsed to the ground, Edshot ran towards the Slayer, and he morphed himself as thin as he could be. His transformation was faster than the speed of sound. He launched himself at the Slayer like he was a spear as he rotated his body like an ultra-thin drill. Edshot knew that this attack of his was fatal to his opponent, but this man would be a danger to everyone in Japan if he escaped. He had no other option. Killing art. Spiral spear bore. He spun himself faster. His paper edges grew sharper and glowed red as he was seconds away from piercing straight through the vigilante's armor, until the Slayer shot his hand up and caught him in midair, stopping Edshot's attack. The pointed end of the hero's body was mere inches away from the side of the Doomslayer's head, even though the attack wouldn't have penetrated his Predator suit in the slightest. Edshot attempted to wrest himself free from the Slayer's grasp by making his body thinner, but to his shock, he couldn't move. It was borderline impossible for anyone to hold him in place due to his quirk, but the vigilante had him in an inescapable vice grip. The Doomslayer smashed the paper-thin hero to the ground, the force of the impact cracking the pavement and forcibly reverting Edshot back into regular form. As Shinya experienced pain like he never felt before, Taggart punched him in the face, hefted him up, and kicked him across the street. More heroes attempted to attack him, but he pulled out his pistol again and started shooting the intact cars along the sides of the street, the 4-megawatt rounds easily tearing through the metal and detonating the fuel tanks. Each explosion threw the heroes backward, with some escaping the blast radius and engaging the Slayer. Gran Torino coughed as he tried to pick himself up until he felt something wet in his hand. He glanced down to his right and gasped in horror at the sight of his hand submerged in the torn open ribcage of a dead saber. Entrails splayed out across the body's lap. Torino quickly yanked his hand back, just as Fourth Kind crashed through the brick wall next to him. The aging hero scrambled back onto his feet and looked through the destroyed opening to gawk at the sight of the chivalrous hero beaten, within an inch of his life, laying face down in the rubble. He checked his pulse and was relieved that he was still alive. But that's when realized something. He looked over his shoulder to witness a recovered Shishido throw himself at the Slayer, who grabbed him by the neck and slugged him several times in the chest before throwing him away, while Eel Boy came up from behind the Slayer and grabbed him in a headlock. He discharged an electric current to shock the Doomslayer, but it had no effect, and Eel Boy was thrown off, followed up by being suplexed by the Slayer. He's not trying to kill us, he's incapacitating us. Gran Torino realized, much to his surprise. But we've grossly underestimated his strength. Where are you, Yagi? He inwardly panicked. Centipeder flung out his centipede arms at the Slayer, but he grabbed his arms and started slamming him into the ground over and over again like a duffel bag, throwing him over his shoulder afterward. Out of nowhere, a large bubble suddenly encased itself around the Doomslayer. Taggart curiously observed more layers being added to the bubble, and he looked over his shoulder to observe Bubble Girl sending out a swarm of large bubbles from her hands, while Pixie Bob quickly dragged the unconscious Centipeder away. The sound of shearing metal alerted him to Power Loader tearing open a fire hydrant outlet with his iron claws. As a cascade of water flowed from the hydrant and pooled around the Doomslayer, Elecplant stood next to Bubble Girl and charged up lighting within his fists. Electricity crackled around his body as it glowed brighter and brighter until he fired a beam of concentrated lightning at the Slayer. Thor's fist. The bolt of enhanced lightning hit the Doomslayer head-on, and a massive column of blinding thunder erupted into the sky, amplified by the water. Everyone was forced to shield their eyes from the brightly shining pillar of light, while some were momentarily blinded. The pro-heroes were beginning to think that could have been the end of it, until the Devil's Boogeyman instantly emerged from the lightning pillar and sprinted towards the distracted heroes like a fucking cheetah. That's when the Doomslayer did something unexpected. He drew his rocket launcher, rotated it around, flipped it upside down, and held it by its foregrip in a reverse grip. He was using his rocket launcher as a tonfa. He closed the distance with Electplant and swung his weapon upwards, knocking him into the air before hitting him downwards to the ground. The back of Electplant's head banged against the hard concrete. Despite being in a lot of pain, Electplant shot up and attacked with his lighting-infused fists, but the Slayer ruthlessly battered him with his tonfa before finishing him off with a lunging punch that sent the hero hurtling through a truck. Bubble Girl attempted to send out another wave of her bubbles, but the Doomslayer was already upon her, and he backhanded her right through a store window with barely any effort. Power Loader leaped in from behind and slashed away at the Slayer's back with his iron-tipped claws, which broke upon impact. Taggart turned around and slammed his weapon onto PL's head. The force was strong enough to crack his large helmet in two halves and render him unconscious. Mr. Plastic and Dame Moto went on the offensive just as Salam, Gran Torino, and El Magnifico Matador did the same. They all charged at the Slayer while performing their signature attacks. Mr. Patik reared his fist back as he coiled his arm. Dame Moto launched into a spinning kick boosted by the engines protruding from her back, and Gran Tornio began to channel his quirk through his boots. Magnifico took up a bullfighter's stance with his sword pointed at the Slayer, while Salam unsheathed the khopesh holstered around his waist and spun his body vertically until he turned himself into a living buzzsaw, hurling himself towards the Slayer. Elastic Drill, Mulan Event Turbo, Guillotine of Osiris, Jetstream Barrage, Lanza del Relampago. This whole shtick they were doing was starting to get annoying. He sidestepped Mr. Plastic's elongated corkscrew blow and ducked under Dame Moto's spinning kick, just as Papyrus was seconds away from making contact, while Magnifico and Torino vanished from sight. Shooting towards the Doomslayer as fast as a bullet, Magnifico thrust his sword at him just as Salam brought down his khopesh upon the vigilante. No sooner did both blades break in half against the Slayer armor, he swung his tonfa right into Dame Moto's head before spinning around and catching Gran Torino by the face. He threw his rocket launcher upwards to divert their attention, smashed his elbow into El Magnifico Matador's face, and slammed Gran Torino into the pavement. He then caught his falling weapon, clamped his free hand around Salam's neck, and brought his tonfa down upon the hero hard enough to fold him like the piece of paper he was. He grabbed the still-stretched arm of Mr. Plastic and swung the hero over his head and into a car behind him just as he clotheslined Dame Moto, who managed to spring back up and tried to do a flying kick at him. Mr. Plastic groaned painfully as he attempted to sit himself up, but the vigilante was already upon him and promptly received an armored fist to his face. The Doomslayer yanked his fist out of Plastic's compressed face, humorously taking note of the fist indentation in the hero's rubbery head. He then slowly turned his head over to the stunned heroes a distance away from him. He plodded toward them as he held his rocket launcher in its original firearm position, while his audible, heavy footsteps heralded their imminent ass-kicking. Sweat poured down Aizawa's forehead as his heart hammered against his chest. It was difficult to stop his legs from shaking. All around him, he saw the terrified expressions of his friends and colleagues as they took several steps backward. Shifting his attention toward the approaching vigilante, Aizawa saw not a man, but a literal beast in human form silently mocking them. All their quirks, all their tactics, all of it meant nothing before this man. And after seeing him take down 5 pro heroes on his own, he questioned why he and the others didn't do a thing to help. Were they truly that afraid of him? Ectoplasm snapped and vomited a milky white plume of smoke from his mouth, which formed a small army of clones that numbered up to 36 copies. The clones rushed the Great Slayer, who simply fired a rocket into the group, and the resulting explosion evaporated the clones. But that's when Ryukyu in her dragon form burst forth from the smoke and snatched up the Slayer in her claws, flying high into the sky above the buildings near the central tower. Majestic, Loud Cloud, Feng Huang, and X took to the skies and followed Ryukyu just as she flung him into the air. Ryukyu flew above the Doomslayer and then dived-bombed towards her prey like a hawk, while the other heroes drew nearer. Dragon's Dash. Okay, he had enough of this crap. He attached the remote detonation mod to his rocket launcher, fired it at his feet, and then detonated the rocket so that the force of the explosion propelled him upwards toward Ryukyu. The dragon heroine charged up a silver-colored fireball in her mouth as quickly as she could, but the Slayer kicked her in the jaw, forcing her mouth to clamp shut and douse the fireball. He double-jumped onto her back and gripped both of her wings, squeezing tightly as he did. Unable to flap her wings, Ryukyu was sent into freefall as the vigilante guided her on a collision course with the side of the central tower. She smashed headlong into the wall, just as the Slayer jumped off her back and punched her deeper into the building. The flying heroes could only watch as Ryukyu's massive form slid off the wall and plummeted to the street below, the heroine reverting back into human form. Majestic threw a yellow energy ring at the falling Slayer and blinded his arms to his waist, while Loud Cloud soared towards him with his bow staff raised above his head in desperation. The Doomslayer freed himself from his bindings with a mighty flex of his arms and delivered a right hook into Oboro's face, slammed his fist down upon his cranium, and snatched the hero's bow staff out of the air. He threw the staff at Majestic like a javelin and destroyed the spiral platform he rode upon. The Bane of Hell detonated another rocket at his feet, making sure Loud Cloud was out of the blast radius, and launched himself at Majestic, grappling with the falling hero before knocking him out with 3 quick punches to his chest and using him like a springboard to leap towards Feng Wang and X. Panicking, X fired a barrage of stingers at him from her fingertips while Feng Wang unleashed a combination of rainbow flame jets and jade feathers from her wings. The attacks bounced off of his Predator's suit, much to their horror, and he double-jumped right at them, grabbing them by the sides of their heads and smashing them together. The Doomslayer flung the 2 downed heroines downwards as he fell from the sky. Eraserhead tossed out his capture tape to catch the 5 plummeting heroes and carry them to safety just as the Slayer landed onto an unoccupied pickup truck. He lifted his head, glaring at the frightened heroes before stepping down off the crushed vehicle and charging toward them. But then he heard the sounds of heavy footsteps approaching towards his right. Canyon Cannon. A recovered MT lady leaped into a flying kick and collided right into the Doomslayer. Her foot smashed him into the ground as the giantess skidded through the street, her heel grinding him deeper and deeper into the asphalt. The heroes jumped back from the debris scattering everywhere as Mr. Lady ground to a halt and wasted no time in repeatedly stomping on the prone Slayer. She then switched to punching him with her fists as she let out a furious roar of frustration. Despite the sting of a few broken ribs causing her great pain, MT Lady did not relent as she continued to smash her giant fists into the vigilante. You was mad as hell. Nobody hurts her boyfriend. She clasped both of her hands together and brought them down on the Slayer, unintentionally knocking back some of the heroes from the impact. MT Lady drove her hand into the crater and got a good grip on the vigilante as she yanked him out of the street. You stood up with the little psycho tightly within her grasp and looked down at her clenched fist. She felt no movement. I think I got him, Dash. The Doomslayer instantly forced her hand open and jumped towards her throat, landing on it and squeezing her neck like he was choking a chicken. Aha wakwek. MT Lady gagged and coughed as she stumbled backward, desperately pawing at her throat in an attempt to dislodge the vigilante, but to no avail. The heroes were forced to scramble out of the way to avoid getting stepped on. Her back hit the side of the central tower before collapsing to the ground, thrashing violently as she tried to pry the Doomslayer off of her neck. Her air was being cut off and her vision became hazy. You finally lost her strength as her eyes rolled into the back of her head, slipping out of consciousness. The Slayer hopped off her neck as MT Lady went limp and shrunk back to her normal size. The Doomslayer eyed her with pity. That woman wouldn't last 5 seconds against a Titan. Taggart refocused his attention back to the remaining heroes and advanced toward them with menacing intent. Now there were 11. Eraserhead, Rocklock, Present Mike, Manuel, Pixie Bob, Vlad King, Big Red Dot, Concert, Backdraft, 13, and Nikang. The heroes were beginning to panic as the vigilante made his way over to them. Concert, briefly glancing towards Present Mike and seeing no heroes presently near the vigilante, the conductor hero summoned a giant conical horn resembling a megaphone. Present Mike and Concert exchanged glances and nodded just as the latter willed 2 smaller, musical notes to plug up his ears. Everyone, cover your ears. Mike shouted to everyone within an earshot. He positioned himself behind the megaphone and twisted some of the knobs on the directional speaker system around his neck. He took a long, deep breath as the vigilantes started to run towards them, and yai. It was the loudest sonic scream Yamada unleashed in his entire life. The sonic wave shot out of the megaphone like a cannon, shredding apart anything caught in its path. The streets and sidewalks peeled like band-aids from the sonic force, while the windows that hadn't been shattered from the submarine explosion earlier broke apart, forcing the heroes who were covering their ears to flee from the falling glass shards. Buildings shook, light posts were torn from their foundations, cars were sheared like cheap tin, and the ground cracked apart. Any normal human being caught in the path of an amplified sonic scream of that magnitude would have had the skin flayed right off their bodies. The Slayer, on the other hand, was no mere human. The sonic wave collided with him, pushing him backward just a tiny bit before regaining his footing and sprinting right through the sound wave. Present Mike desperately screamed louder as his throat went raw. The Doomslayer picked up speed as the sonic waves harmlessly glanced off his suit and closed the distance, destroying the megaphone with a single punch. He grabbed the shocked Mike by the DSS around his neck and crushed it in his hand before pulling the voice hero into a headbutt that shattered his nose and broke his glasses. He powerbombed the hero to the ground and glared at his next target. Concert attempted to summon more notes to attack the Doomslayer, but he was grabbed by the neck and flipped on the Slayer's shoulders. Taggart then started crushing the conductor hero in an Argentine backbreaker. Concert could only yell in agony from the vigilante's crushing grip before his head was buried into the asphalt via a sit-out facebuster. The remaining heroes lost all composure and attacked out of sheer terror. Big Red fired a stream of highly pressured water from his mouth at the Doomslayer, while Manual and Backdraft followed suit as they hosed him down with their water-based quirks. But this was all for naught as the Doomslayer shrugged off their attacks, socked BRD across the face, swept him off his feet with a sweeping kick, and finished him off with a downward punch to the side of his head. He lunged forward and grabbed Backdraft's spigot hands before swinging his foot into the hero's stomach, throwing him right into Manual afterward. Manual tried to haul himself up, but the Slayer darted towards him and kicked him across the face before leaping toward Backdraft and stomping on his head. Nikang extended his hand to manifest several wisps of blue light that flew around near the debris scattered around the area. They phased into the rubble and formed themselves into sizable, humanoid shapes while gathering more debris into themselves to form golems. There were around 8 of them in total, which were soon joined by dozens of ectoplasm clones. Without a hint of hesitation, the Great Slayer charged toward the horde and threw himself into the thick of it. Every punch destroyed any opponent in his path, and he was rapidly thinning out his foes with unrelenting vigor. Vlad King stood next to Nikang and Ectoplasm to assist in any way he could. Vlad King shot a volley of razor-sharp spikes from his wrist guards that were made of his blood. The blood spears didn't deter him or stall his advance in the slightest as he destroyed the last of the meat shields separating him from the remaining heroes. He knocked aside the last golem and clone, and knocked out Ectoplasm's oversized teeth with a flying punch. As Ectoplasm toppled onto the sidewalk, Nikang and Vlad King attacked the Doomslayer with their sword and blood claws respectively. The Hellwalker drove his fists into Vlad's face while catching Nikang's sword with his free hand. He broke it off with a twist and headbutt Nikang, breaking apart his face mask. He jumped up and elbowed Vlad into painful unconsciousness. Gruh! Rocklock furiously darted toward the vigilante with the intent to immobilize him with his quirk. The Doomslayer whirled around with his fist poised to strike down the hero. Rocklock's life flashed before his eyes, but then Aizawa's capture tape suddenly wrapped itself around his waist and yanked him backward, the vigilante's fist missing him by mere inches. The Slayer's fist slammed into the ground as he glared at his remaining opponents: Eraserhead, Rocklock, 13, and Pixie Bob. Knowing that they weren't going to surrender and they would just try to impede his escape if he left now, he slowly made his over to them with his fists balled up. The 4 heroes shook like leaves. That was it. It was all over for them. There was no way they could fight back. This man was insanely powerful. Some of them were thinking that he's stronger than All Might. They knew that their quirks wouldn't be able to stop him after witnessing him plow through several pros like their cardboard cutouts. As the vigilante drew nearer, 13 looked down at her hands. There was a voice in the back of her mind that was telling her what must be done. She knew of the dangers her quirk posed and spent years of her life training herself to use black hole non-lethally. She did manage to create a special move a long time ago, but it was far too dangerous to use. She swore to herself long ago that she would never use her powers to bring harm to anyone, only using them to contain villains while being careful not to fatally crush them. But now 13 was out of options, and she regretfully prepared herself for what she was about to do. The ports on her fingertips opened up, but instead of sucking the Slayer in, she reversed the suction so that it blew a powerful gust into her palms until it formed swirling pitch-black orbs. The Bane of Hell narrowed his eyes at 13 as he continued walking toward the group. He remembered reading up on Anin Kuros during his free time before the mall incident and was very interested in her black hole quirk. But he could see that this attack seemed different from what he had seen in video footage about her. Instantaneous compression, singularity gate. 13 brought the orbs together to create a bowling ball-sized black hole in her hands and hurled it toward the Slayer. It hurtled through the air, expanding in size and sucking in random debris, but the vacuum became stronger as it traveled. The Doomslayer went over numerous options in his head about how to counter the black hole. His suit was immensely durable, but was it black hole resistant? He wasn't going to jump inside it to find out, and Vegas seemingly didn't have any suggestions, so he decided to take a pretty big risk. He rushed towards the enlarged vortex, and to everyone's astonishment, he caught it with his bare fucking hands. "What?" Pixie Bob exclaimed as she fell on her rear. "That's impossible." 13 gasped as Eraserhead and Rocklock staggered backward in shock. The Slayer wrestled with the black hole. It thrashed around his hands as objects bounced off his armor while the ground cracked beneath his feet. He finally managed to get a good grip on the vortex after a few seconds of struggling and crushing it in his hands. Cracks began to form in the singularity as the Doomslayer squeezed harder and harder. His teeth clenched as he put all of his strength into his hands. The black hole started to decompress until it exploded, dispersing in a burst of pressurized air that blew away the rubble around him. The dust cleared a little as the heroes' mouths hung open. The Slayer looked down at his hands in curiosity as he flexed his fingers. He just crushed a black hole. That's a first. His focus then centered on 13. While he couldn't see behind that helmet she wore, her trembling hands were a dead giveaway that she was scared out of her wits. She fumbled with her hands and tried to prepare her singularity gate again, but the Doomslayer rushed forward in a heartbeat and tackled her to the ground. He tore off her helmet and slugged her across the face. She was out like a light in seconds. Pixie Bob felt a surge of anger well up inside. She was unable to help anyone during the fight against the vigilante. Her quirk needed fresh soil to function, and now she was forced to watch one of her friends get hammered into the ground. She grabbed a nearby rebar rod from a pile of rubble and rushed the Slayer with a furious roar, swinging it against his head. It broke on impact, and the Doomslayer slowly turned her head towards Pixie Bob, who looked like a deer caught in the headlights. "Please don't dash." The Doomslayer booted her into a stop sign, the back of her head banging against the metal and knocking her out. "Ryuko," Eraserhead called out. He was just about to attempt to rescue Pixie Bob when Rocklock grabbed him by the arm and dragged him away. "Ken, what the hell are you, Dash? We have to get out of here," he yelled as he pulled Aizawa's arm. "What? We can't just leave her, Dash. We can't fight this guy. Just fucking run, Dash." Rocklock was cut off when an armored boot collided with his face, which sent him sprawling into a brick wall and knocked Eraserhead down. Aizawa sat himself up and saw to his horror the vigilante grabbing Ken by the face and smashing the back of his head into the wall. He dropped the unconscious hero and snapped his head over to Aizawa, stomping towards him with an aura of menace. Eraserhead quickly unsheathed the combat knife around his belt and thrust it at the Slayer, who easily caught him by the wrist. Eraserhead strained as he tried to move his hand, but it wouldn't budge. He angrily glared at the vigilante, his eyes bloodshot due to continuously using his quirk during the entire fight. He could see his reflection in the vigilante's visor, his desperation visible. Aizawa grit his teeth together as he tried to force the knife at him, roaring in defiance in a valiant refusal to give up. But the Doomslayer swiftly punched him straight in the face, knocking him out and unceremoniously releasing the hero. As the Slayer silently watched Eraserhead's body crumple to the ground, he glanced behind him at the scene of destruction. All of his opponents lay defeated at his feet. It was no surprise to him. How could mere mortals defeat a demigod? Island Airport baggage claim area. 2 minutes earlier. Standing outside the security office, Izuku, Yagi, and Mirio could hear the sounds of the conflict raging outside. It had gone on for quite a while, the rumbling and explosions loud enough to be heard from over at the airport. There was also a loud scream, one that could have only come from present Mike, that forced them to cover their ears. When they first heard the noises coming from far away, they assumed that the heroes had left the airport to stop the vigilante from escaping. The noises eventually began to wind down, causing Izuku and Mirio to look at each other worriedly. As much as they wanted to guess what was going on out there, they didn't want to necessarily jinx it, so to speak. Yagi's expression grew serious. He was unsure if his comrades were winning or losing, but he wasn't going to sit around and do nothing while brave heroes got seriously injured. "I'm going out there," Yagi announced as he walked through the baggage claim. "Why you are?" Midoriya followed after him, as did Mirio. "But you've already reached your limit for today." "Not yet. I needed a quick rest, so I've regained at least 10 more minutes or so. More than enough to take down that vigilante." He stared down at his hand and clenched it. The boy's eyes widened at that. "Are you sure? You'd be using up more of one for all and lowering your time limit," Mirio warned. Yagi stopped walking and closed his eyes. "I know, but that's what being a hero is about. Taking risks to protect people and ensure their safety. It's about giving it all to make the world a safer place and push past your limits." He then transformed into his muscled state, his costume tightly wrapping around his muscles, and looked over his shoulder to give his students a beaming smile. Plus ultra. He bounded across the room and down the stairs, the boys running after him as best they could. As they went down the stairs, they could hear the cheers of the citizens downstairs. They arrived at the main lobby, only to find that All Might had already left. As Izuku and Mirio went back over to their friends, Midoriya stopped and looked towards the open doors All Might had presumably exited through. He did not doubt his mentor's strength, but he couldn't fight off this nagging feeling that something might go wrong. His hands twitching nervously, Izuku ran out of the room, though Mirio noticed this and gave chase after him while the crowd was preoccupied. But he wasn't the only one who watched Izuku leave. Uraraka noticed both of them leave in a hurry and could only stare in confusion. She mentally questioned why they would just run towards obvious danger when All Might could easily handle this, but her thoughts then focused on Izuku. She felt a tightness in her chest as a wave of concern for Midoriya washed over her. She wasn't sure why she was feeling this strange, but she had this overwhelming urge to follow Izuku. Ochako dreaded the thought of having to wade through the lake of blood and viscera again, but she steeled herself as best she could and quickly made her way toward the door while her friends' backs were turned. All except for Bakugo, who watched her leave. Raising an eyebrow, he stood himself up but stumbled when he felt his legs shaking. A furious scowl graced his features as he thought back to the ballroom. He ignored him. That fucking green asshole ignored him like he was an ant. Grinding his teeth together angrily, Bakugo found the strength return to his legs and followed Uraraka, though he lagged behind a little. He was going to blow that stupid fucking helmet right off his face, or maybe watch All Might kick his ass. Either way, Bakugo was never going to let that bastard have the last laugh. Island Battleground. The doomslayer slowly and silently walked through the destroyed streets where the battle against the pro-heroes took place. Treading amongst the battered bodies of the brave men and women who tried their hardest to arrest him, he eventually came to the destroyed remains of his cement prison. He stared at it for a while before glancing behind his shoulder at the destruction that stretched down the road. The Slayer took this in and lowered his head. It never should have come to this. He never wanted to put these heroes through so much pain, but they made their choice. He couldn't decide if he should pity them or curse them for their bullheadedness. Either way, the heroes should consider themselves lucky that he held himself back. The injuries he gave them weren't serious or life-threatening, but they were more than enough to put them in the hospital for a couple of days. By my calculations, nothing I could have said would have been enough to dissuade the heroes from fighting you. This was, regrettably, the only course of action. But I do appreciate that you did not cripple or paralyze them. The Doomslayer shook his head at his defeated opponents in pity and resumed walking. His destination was the open water, where he could escape. He walked a little bit away from the aftermath of the battle until he heard a whistling sound in the air, which caused him to turn around. The Slayer could see a speck sail through the sky in an arc. It drew closer to his position until it crash-landed a distance away from him near the end of the street. Rubble scattered around the area as the smoke cloud cleared up to reveal that it was none other than the symbol of peace himself, All Might. "You're not going anywhere, because I am here." All Might glared at the vigilante, baring his teeth like an angry lion. The doomslayer silently stared back at him impassively. The man was taking things seriously if his posture was anything to go by. But the doomslayer also knew that he couldn't keep up that form for long after what he learned from David Shield's secret office. It would seem he was going to have to beat up another hero, one that everybody looked up to. All Might never took his eyes off the vigilante, who just stood there without making a move. He balled his hands into fists and was just about to speak when he heard someone painfully groan to his right. Looking downwards, he gasped at the sight of Cementos lying on the ground. His stony face had visible cracks all over it. Yagi turned around and saw to his horror dozens of pro-heroes, many of whom were his friends, sprawled out on the ground in various states of agony. Yagi's eyes eventually found their way over to the prone, bloody form of Endeavor face down on the sidewalk. He did not think NG could be beaten to this extent. All Might glared back at the vigilante furiously. He had never felt this angry before, not since he fought AFO to avenge Nana Shimura. This man was extremely dangerous and couldn't be allowed to walk free. No more playing around. He had to stop him right here and now. Texas. He balled up his fist, rearing it back as his muscles tensed up. All Might launched himself towards the vigilante as one for all coursed through his veins and into his fists. Contrails emerged from his knuckles as he reached maximum velocity. The Doomslayer ran towards All Might undaunted. They closed the distance with each other, and the Slayer swung his fist at him, but All Might dodged it at the very last second. All Might punched the Doomslayer directly across the face, unleashing a massive burst of air and knocking the Slayer off his feet. The air current slammed into him with so much force he was sent propelling down the street and right into a building. The impact alone was enough to split the building in two as the halves toppled onto the other buildings next to it, kicking up dust and debris that rained down on All Might. Yagi breathed through his nose intensely as he felt a stinging pain in his knuckles. He stared at the smoke cloud for a few seconds until the silhouette of the vigilante came into view. All Might clenched his teeth. This man's strength was no joke. He still had roughly 9 minutes left, and he hoped that was more than enough time to subdue the vigilante. The Doomslayer did not feel anger or annoyance, but was rather impressed that All Might managed to lay a hit on him. A hit that he felt. He brought his fingers up to the side of his helmet and felt to his surprise that there was a tiny dent in his Predator armor. An actual dent. He had sustained damage to his suit before throughout his battle against the forces of the Dark Realm, namely from stronger demons like the Archviles, Cyber Demons, Barons of Hell, the resurrected Balgur in the Lazarus Labs, the Hell Guards, and the newest incarnation of the Spider Mastermind. His suit was capable of absorbing trace amounts of Argent energy in the air to repair itself. But there was no Argent energy in this universe, and All Might was the first mortal man that did some damage to his armor. The man truly was a superhero. Looking back at him, the Slayer knew the hero wasn't going to let him go, but at the same time, he was eager to see what else All Might was capable of. Even though the Slayer was aware that All Might probably couldn't keep up that form for long, a part of him wanted to see if the man could go beyond his limitations. One-punch man smash an enemy. All Might got into a track-running position, exhaling heavily as he stared daggers at the vigilante. / internal scans show that he will only be able to maintain this form for 9 minutes. / The Doomslayer slowly brought up his hands and cracked his knuckles. It was on. 013. All Might broke into a full sprint that leveled the street as he shot towards the Doomslayer, who charged like a freight train. They closed the distance with each other, and they threw out their fists. Their knuckles collided with each other and created an enormous shockwave that destroyed their surroundings. A crater formed where they stood, and the buildings near them collapsed to the ground. The wind current from the blows blew away the wreckage surrounding them as the two superhumans drew their fists back and engaged in battle. They traded blows with each other like wild animals. Each hit from All Might impacted the Slayer's armor hard enough to leave tiny dents. Each blow from the Slayer, on the other hand, rattled All Might's bones and threatened to break them. They still kept slamming their fists against each other until Taggart grabbed All Might by the wrist and uppercut him in the abdomen. All Might felt searing pain course through his body, but then he grabbed the doomslayer by the sides of his head and reared his head back. Vermont Smayowash. He headbutted the slayer hard enough to stagger the Hellwalker backward and followed up by hurling a left hook across the face. All Might's vision grew hazy from the headbutt, and his forehead bled profusely. The slayer regained his footing and unleashed a series of brutal boxing moves to pummel All Might. He socked him into a wall, and the slayer rushed forward to hit him again, but All Might somersaulted over his shoulders, avoiding the blow. Louisiana Smayowash. He tackled the slayer through the wall like a football player and bulldozed him through several buildings. 026. The UA students arrived at the scene just in time to see a row of buildings fall over like literal dominoes. Their jaws were agape, but their astonishment turned to horror when they saw the battered forms of dozens of pro heroes sprawled out on the ground. They were all covered in bruises and unmoving, though occasionally let out moans of pain. As they stared in shock, one of the heroes is about to regain consciousness, one of whom the teens recognized. "Sensei," Midoriya exclaimed. They rushed over to his side and carefully helped him up. Aizawa coughed into his hand, and he opened his weary eyes to meet the concerned faces of some of his students. "Midoriya?" he croaked, his eyes still red and stinging from overuse of erasure. "Are you okay?" Ochako came forward before she was startled by Bakugu's loud outburst. "What happened?" he yelled, his eyes never leaving the sea of defeated heroes. "What the fuck happened?" The sound of another building getting destroyed followed by a burst of wind pressure that nearly knocked the over interrupted whatever Aizawa had to say. He managed to find the strength to stand up, but he fell over with Mirio catching his fall. He coughed again before straining his eyes. "Get me over there," he pleaded. Mirio was taken aback by this. "What? We shouldn't get caught up in the middle of that dash. Now." 038. All Might plowed the slayer through the last building before being repeatedly bashed against the side of his head by an armored fist. All Might's body slammed him into the ground, but the slayer kicked him right in the chest, sending the hero skidding away from him. The two titans launched themselves at each other and ended up punching each other across the face at the same time. But instead of being blown back, they were rooted to the ground as it cracked from the pressure. All Might still had the Doomslayer's fist mashed firmly against his face. It was the same for the Slayer as well. They glared at each other before yanking their fists back and resuming the bout. The Slayer drove a flying knee into the side of All Might's face. Yagi could feel some of his molars come loose as well as near-blinding pain, but he powered through it and grabbed the Doomslayer by his leg and left arm. Oklahoma Smayowash. All Might spun the Slayer around like a top, rapidly gaining momentum, and flung him like a frisbee towards the top floor of a 50-story building. The Slayer crashed through the window and hit the ceiling, landing on the floor in the middle of a conference room. He stood up and wiped the dust off of him until he looked towards the window to his right and witnessed All Might jump into view up to the top floor in a single bound. All Might rotated his body around guard up for another one of his famous moves. New Hampshire Smayowash. He punched the air and Yagi propelled himself like a missile at the Great Slayer, bursting through the window and colliding with the Slayer. He skidded across the floor as All Might kept elbowing him in the visor. The blows distorted his HUD, prompting the Doomslayer to grab the two tufts of Yagi's hair and hurled him around over his head before slamming him to the floor. All Might coughed up blood as he felt a rib snap, just as he rolled out of the way to avoid an overhead blow from the Slayer. His fists impacted the floor and created multiple cracks that spread along the room. Oregon Smayowash. All Might leaped across the room and raised his foot to deliver an axe kick to his opponent, but the Doomslayer grabbed him by the ankle and swung him down to the floor. It finally broke apart, sending the two of them falling to the next floor below them. With an enraged yell, All Might lunged at the Slayer again, and what followed was a rapid-fire maelstrom of fury. They punched, kicked, grappled, scrapped, brawled, and beat each other as the battle ripped apart the foundations of the building they were in. The floor kept collapsing beneath their feet, sending them down floor after floor as the fight grew in intensity. They finally hit the ground floor as the building began to crumble from the damage it sustained during the chaotic fight. 104. Izuku, Ochako, Bakugu, Mirio, and Eraserhead followed the sounds of the destructive battle through the ruined city until they turned around the corner and watched a building crumble to the ground, smoke billowing from the impact and sending a wave of it racing towards the group. "Duck!" Aizawa shouted as they dove out of the street into an alley just as the cascade of smoke flowed past them. They coughed as some of it began to seep into the alleyway, but then a powerful gust of wind blew away the smoke in an instant. They exited the alley and saw All Might near the destroyed building with the vigilante standing not too far away from him. All Might's costume was torn in some places and was bleeding from his nose and mouth with numerous cuts and abrasions all over his body. He breathed heavily as blood dribbled down his chin. The Doomslayer stood with an imposing posture, a clear difference from the fatigued hero. But his armor did have multiple dents in it from the fight. The Slayer was unconcerned with this, but it was still impressive that Yagi was able to accomplish this feat whatever quirk this man had. It was almost as comparable to his strength. He leveled a glare at the group, who backed away out of fear except for Bakugu, who got into a fighting stance as small explosions formed in his hands. Aizawa immediately clamped a hand over the boy's wrist, shaking his head at him. All Might peered over his shoulder at Izuku and started to fret over his pupil getting hurt. But when his eyes laid on Aizawa, something occurred to him. He thought back to each hit he sustained from the vigilante during his fight with him. As horrendously painful as those blows were, he felt something behind them, and the realization hit All Might. He focused his attention back on the vigilante, who began to approach him. "You're holding back." The Doomslayer stopped walking. "I may have fought dozens of villains during my career, but I also had my fair share of friendly sparring matches with my fellow heroes as well. So I know when someone is pulling their punches. All of those heroes you fought back there, you could have killed them all as easily as you killed the Sabers, but you didn't. Because you're not the type that kills innocent people," he revealed, a smile gracing his lips. "Honestly, that makes me feel relieved." This came as a shock for Izuku and the others. If he was putting All Might through the ringer but holding back through the whole fight, then just how strong was he? It was a bigger shock for Eraserhead, who dreaded to think what would have happened to him and the other heroes if the vigilante wasn't feeling merciful. All Might was more observant than the Slayer originally thought. Yes, he was holding back because if he used his full strength, he would end up killing them, and he would never kill anyone innocent. "But I can't let you walk away after you hurt my friends and carried out this slaughter. You don't have the right to take the law into your own hands or decide who dies. Did the Sabers truly need to die this day?" The Slayer glared at All Might before glancing down to his right at the corpse of a Saber lying face down next to him. He lifted his foot and squashed the merc's head underneath his boot, making sure to grind the body's skull and brain matter with his heel. A wave of nausea washed over everyone, with Uraraka throwing up. All Might was mortified at the vigilante's apparent sociopathy and grew angry, fists balling up as one for all flowed through his veins. "No more. I will not let you carry out this senseless violence any longer," he proclaimed as he shot toward the vigilante like a bullet. 138. "I won't let you," he roared as he rocketed his fist at the charging vigilante. The Slayer caught his wrist and rammed his forehead right into All Might's nose while landing multiple blows to his stomach. He started crushing All Might's wrist, but then the symbol of peace clamped his hand around the Doomslayer's neck and swung his foot up into his chin and wrestled his arm free. Detroit Smaoasish. He slammed his fist against the Doomslayer's helmet, the force of the impact creating a shockwave that toppled the buildings around them and blew away the clouds in the sky. The group was knocked down from the rush of air and scrambled away from the debris and rubble flying toward them. They fled from the battle and hid behind a still intact building just in time to dodge an APC that almost flattened them. Izuku stuck his head out a bit to watch the fight continue. The Doomslayer back-fisted All Might before driving his fist into the side of his head. Yagi gritted his teeth as he experienced double vision, but launched himself into a spinning kick to the Slayer's side. But the Slayer raised both of his fists and brought them down upon All Might, smashing him against the pavement and sending him skidding along the street. All Might ground himself to a halt and ran towards the vigilante without a hint of hesitation as the battle showed no signs of slowing down. Island's central tower bottom floor lobby. The lobby was quiet save for the telltale flapping of wings descending from above. Hawks flew down while carrying Maruko and landed in the middle of the lobby, jostling her a little. "Ow!" Will you be careful? Maruko hissed as pain shot through her. Sorry about that. I'm still a little dizzy from that sucker punch earlier. Hawks apologized as he set Rumi down on her feet and slung her arm over his shoulder. Sounds like you got it easy. My body still friggin' hurts, and I'm seeing double. Maruko replied as she tried to focus her eyes, steadily overcoming the morphine bit by bit. A few seconds ago, the pair had just regained consciousness in the med lab. While they were a bit disoriented at first, they managed to get their heads back on straight and decided to make their way down through the tower, though Hawks had to carry Maruko due to her impaired state. Hawks was momentarily distracted by the bloody symbol on the wall until a series of loud rumbles shook the lobby, dust raining from the ceiling above. Rumi's ears rotated around, trying to pinpoint the location of where the rumblings were coming from. You got something? Hawks inquired. Rumi listened in for a few more seconds. It's All Might. I can hear him. For real. A surprised Hawks blinked. Do you know any other hero who says smash in all of their attacks? Maruko rhetorically humored him. Come on, he's probably fighting our vigilante, and he's probably going to need our help. While Maruko knew that All Might was as strong as 100 pro heroes, she couldn't shake off the feeling that the vigilante may be just as strong. She unslung her arm off Hawks and ran out the entrance, stumbling a little due to the effects of the morphine and her wounds. Maruko sprinted down the steps outside and turned to her ears to the left until she zoned in on where All Might was. There, Maruko pointed out just as Hawks joined up with her. He followed her finger over towards the street that led deeper into the city, where several columns of smoke wafted into the air, joined by the sounds of a chaotic, breakneck brawl echoing throughout the deserted remains of the destroyed buildings. Welp, looks like I'm flying into the danger zone. Hawks jokingly surmised as he took flight with a flap of his wings. You hang back here, I'll go on ahead. Wait, what? Maruko shouted in anger. You're seriously benching me? Hawk sighed and flew back down to her. Look, it is a complete shitstorm over there in Dash. Oh, and just because I'm banged up means I'm the damsel in distress. Maruko argued. Maruko, will you just listen to me? Hawks pleaded. No, you listen. Maruko barked, causing Kigo to back away. Every single time I get hurt, you're always there to yank me away from danger like a dog on a leash. That's because you go out of your way to get yourself hurt every time. Hawk shot back. Rumi had no comeback. Her hair shadowing her eyes as she grimaced, Maruko darted past Hawks and bounded from the ground to the buildings beyond. Hawks watched her become a speck in the distance as she hopped from one building to another. He shook his head sympathetically, feeling a little guilty before taking to the sky to follow Maruko. Rumi jumped from building to building until she saw a geyser of debris and wreckage erupt from an intersection ahead of her, while she heard the unmistakable voice of All Might bellowing furiously. She leaped from her perch on an electrical pole and landed on the sidewalk, only for her to stumble and fall down face first. Hope no one saw that. Maruko moaned as she nursed her nose. Her legs were still numb from the morphine, and some of her wounds still caused her discomfort. She forced herself back onto her feet and made her way down the street until she saw several people at an intersection come into view. She recognized one of them as Eraserhead, and the rest were the same teens she saw back up on the central tower roof, though there was one kid she didn't recognize. Don't those damn kids know how to listen? She grumbled to herself. Maruko got closer and noticed that they were all watching something with looks of fear, while Eraserhead was glaring at the scene while using his quirk. Just as neared them, her jaw fell open at the sight of All Might squaring off against the vigilante. All Might was battered, bruised, and heavily fatigued, while his costume was torn in some places. The vigilante appeared unharmed, though there were noticeable tiny dents in his armor. But what shocked her most was that All Might was down on one knee. Never in her whole career did she ever see All Might brought down this low or injured to this extent. She thought nothing could hurt or bring down the symbol of peace. But this display served to remind Maruko that All Might, despite being the #1 hero of Japan, was still human. And as her eyes drifted over to the vigilante, she began to think that he wasn't human. She had seen how destructive All Might's punches were, but there only left small dents in the vigilante's suit. What the hell was this guy? Eraserhead groaned and brought a hand up to his eyes just as Hawks flew down near the group, his mouth agape when he saw the state All Might was in. Aizawa's eyes were strained to their limit and hurt so much that it was a miracle he didn't become blind. He still didn't know how the vigilante was immune to his quirk, while he theorized earlier that either the suit negated his erasure quirk or that he had a mutation quirk, but he was doubting his own words after witnessing All Might struggle against the vigilante. Izuku and his friends could only watch on, utterly helpless to do a thing. They desperately wanted to help All Might, but did not dare try to fight the vigilante as they wouldn't last a second against him. All Might weakly leveled a glare at the vigilante, but it was all he could do at this point. Wisps of steam permeated from his body, and his lungs burned intensely. He was almost out of time. He was using 100% of OFA against the vigilante, but it still wasn't enough to bring him down, and Yagi could tell that the vigilante was still holding himself back. AFO was using his full power against him during their climatic fight years ago, and that took everything Yagi had to defeat him. To know that there was someone out there who was stronger than AFO and was holding back his true strength was frightening. He is 60 seconds away from reverting. The doomslayer frowned. He thought Yagi could have been the one mortal in eons that gave him a decent fight. It was sort of an odd feeling. He wanted to leave the island after his objectives were accomplished, but when the heroes blocked his path, he incapacitated them out of mercy because he knew they would pose no challenge. None of them could lay a scratch on his Predator suit. But then there was All Might. A man, despite being weakened and running on borrowed time, was the first to damage his suit. Even though it was only superficial and didn't compromise his armor, it was still an impressive feat by itself. The Slayer wanted All Might to earn his respect by being the first human to damage his Predator suit, but unfortunately, Yagi now reached his limit. The Slayer plodded towards All Might, intending to render him unconscious and make a quick exit, knowing that the others wouldn't attempt to give pursuit. Izuku's heart raced as the vigilante drew closer to his mentor. He didn't know what to do. He was terrified of this man. It was the same for the others. They were too intimidated by the vigilante to help All Might. Izuku shut his eyes and grit his teeth, tears threatening to spill out. "Don't give up, All Might." His eyes snapped open when he heard the voice of Uraraka. Glancing to his left, he witnessed his friend clench her fists with a brave face, though there were tears of fright in her eyes. "You can win. I know you can." This seemed to invigorate Mirio, who joined in with gusto. "You can beat him, All Might." Eraserhead, Maruko, and Hawks couldn't help but voice their encouragement, as well as they cheered All Might on. "Don't let this man beat you. Kick his fucking ass, All Might. Fight on. Don't you dare throw in the towel." Bakugo and Izuku felt like little kids again, young boys who looked up to their idol and wanted to be just like him more than anything in the world. They couldn't bear to see him lose. "Win, All Might," they shouted in unison. One Punch Man battle. Their words reached the symbol of peace. He could feel the flames of One for All surge from within like a raging wildfire. He stood straight up, the steam disappearing entirely, his light blue eyes aglow with renewed determination and valor. "That's right," he said to the group as he balled up his fist with a proud smile. "There's so much that we heroes have to protect. That's why I won't lose." Halting his approach towards All Might, the Slayer blinked. All Might has exceeded his established time limit. The overall strength of his quirk has increased by 200%. The Doomslayer smiled. There was still some fight in the old dog after all. It almost reminded the Slayer of his will to keep fighting after he chose to stay in hell following the death of the Mother Demon. Even after running out of ammo and being forced to use his fists to slaughter demons or use his super shotgun as a club, he never once gave up or let himself fall victim to the demons. He kept pushing on even as his sanity was reduced to tatters, but he never stopped fighting. He even had his share of people rooting for him in the form of the Night Sentinels. However, despite All Might's bold claims, he could not win against the Doomslayer. Even if he hadn't been crippled by AFO, and even if he was in his prime, he still couldn't achieve victory against the demigod. The Doomslayer knew this, but he wanted All Might to at least land one more good hit on him. But that didn't mean he was just going to stand and do nothing like he did with Endeavor. All Might would have to earn his last blow, and that meant the Doomslayer wasn't going to make it easy for Yagi. The Doomslayer took up a boxing stance while All Might outstretched his arms while keeping his fists balled. The two warriors stared each other down before charging at each other like raging elephants. 031. What happened next could only be described as two hurricanes clashing against each other. Each thunderous blow that collided against the combatants unleashed powerful shockwaves and busts of pressurized air that obliterated anything close to them. Buildings were torn apart like cardboard. Vehicles were crushed like tin cans. The ground splintered like glass, and debris swirled around them. The group that was watching the fight was nearly bowled over from the shockwave, forcing them to move away for their own safety. All Might was yelling at the top of his lungs as he slammed his fists against the doomslayer as hard as he could. He could feel his knuckles begin to break from each impact as his lungs burned painfully. Blood bubbled up from his throat, but he swallowed it back down as best he could. The hits he sustained from the vigilante were rapidly taking a toll on his body. His opponent was still holding back, but only just a little, and the difference between then and now was scary. But All Might refused to give up and renewed his assault upon the vigilante. The Doomslayer did not let up as he struck All Might across the face. However, his punches had become stronger as they were leaving slightly larger dents on the Slayer's Predator suit. While this by no means meant that All Might was winning or doing any lasting damage to the Slayer, it was still an amazing feat for a mortal. The Slayer felt a very small twinge of excitement because of this. They struck each other across the face once again, the force of the blows sending them skidding away from each other. All Might was having difficulty standing on his own two legs. The damage the Doomslayer wrought upon him had taken its toll. The Slayer wasn't even winded, standing tall despite everything. All Might gazed down at his trembling right hand. This is bad. I'm almost out of time. Nothing I do is slowing him down. He's unstoppable. At this rate, I won't be able to prevent him from escaping unless I have no choice then. I'll have to use the same move that defeated All for One. It's a risk. I'll be using up most of what's left of One for All or worse, but I'm out of options. I have to stop him. All Might reared his right fist back as he took up a stance. The ground beneath the symbol of peace quaked as the muscles in his arm bulged. Streaks of yellowish/green energy crackled along his fist while his eyes glowed brighter. The Doomslayer could tell that All Might was going all in on one final attack before he ran out of time. Narrowing his eyes, the Slayer balled up his own fist, but without an exaggerated stance like All Might. United. In the blink of an eye, All Might shot towards the vigilante like a supersonic rocket while contrails formed around his fist. The Slayer sprinted towards All Might with his fist balled up. He would stop holding back just a tad. They finally closed the distance with each other, their fists primed and ready to deal the last blow. There was no time to dodge. States of, this was it. 123. Smite. Their fists slammed into each other as the force of the impact created an F5 tornado on the spot. It towered into the sky as 300 miles per hour winds shredded apart the surrounding area. Debris and vehicle were caught up in the funnel as it grew in intensity. The tallest of buildings stood no chance against the ferocious tornado of destruction. Izuku and the others were blown away from the winds, but Eraserhead flung out several ropes of his capture tape to catch everyone before they could disappear. He managed to bind his tape to a fire hydrant as an anchor, hoping it would be enough to hold them. But the hydrant was ripped from its foundations by the wind, and everyone was sent flying away. Within the very center of the tornado, All Might and the Doomslayer had their foreheads rammed against each other as their fists drove themselves into their chests. They glared into each other's eyes, though Yagi could only see his reflection in the vigilante's visor. All Might roared in the Slayer's face, while the Slayer frowned deeper in response. They were in a tug-of-war battle with neither fighter budging an inch. The tornado grew bigger and more violent until it dissipated in the blink of an eye, sending whatever rubble and cars it scooped on falling to the ground like rain. There was only a massive crater with a cloud of smoke obscuring it. A distance away from the battle, a pile of debris shifted. It fell apart to reveal a dome made of capture tape and feathers. Inside, everyone was huddled together closely. No one made a peep until Eraserhead unfurled his tape along with Hawks, who retracted his feathers. They stood up and surveyed their surroundings, taking in the sight of a ravaged war zone that left the whole area they were in unrecognizable. I hope that's the end of it. Eraserhead breathed. Everyone else was speechless as they could only gaze at the destruction around them. Izuku stared at the chaos until his eyes found their way over to the plume of smoke at the other end of the street. He started running towards it as fast as he could, ignoring the voices of the others calling out his name. That's when Izuku could make out a tall figure walking out of the smoke, causing him to stop as well as the others who followed him. They were all on edge as the silhouette drew nearer, but then Izuku could make out two unmistakable tufts of hair poking out from the smoke. The group could feel smiles stretch across their faces while joy welled up in their hearts. Izuku looked like he was about to burst into tears. All Might stumbled out of the smoke, and Izuku's smile fell. Yagi was now in his lanky, depowered state. His costume was reduced to tatters, giving everyone a full view of his near-skeletal body and the scars adorning the lower half of his stomach. He fell to his hands and knees as he vomited blood. Dread gripped Izuku as he nervously turned his head towards the group behind him. Mirio and Aizawa were just as distressed as him, while Maruko, Hawks, and Ochako were stunned as their eyes grew wider with each passing second. Yagi, Maruko gawked, wondering if what she was seeing was real or a hallucination from the morphine still in her system. No way. That was all Hawks could say. Oh my goodness. Ochako whispered as her hands clamped over her mouth. But Bakugo was easily taking it the worst. There was no anger or explosive cussing from the boy. There was only a look of shock and what appeared to be heartbreak. It was the look of a kid who was just told that Santa Claus didn't exist. Yagi wheezed painfully as he puked up the last bit of blood in his mouth. Everything hurt. He was in near-blinding pain and his chest burned like hell. His ribs were broken and he could barely move his legs. Looking down at his shaky hand, Yagi could sense, much to his relief, that he still had one for all. But the embers within him were very weak, and by his estimate, he could now only maintain his powered-up form for only an hour a day, and the time limit would just keep decreasing. His mind was so overloaded with pain that he didn't know if he defeated the vigilante or not. Lifting his head a little, his eyes met the upset faces of Izuku, his classmates, and the other heroes. He could only imagine what was going on in their heads. But he could not let them despair over his condition. He needed to show them that the symbol of peace was not defeated and his torch still burned brightly. Sitting himself up but unable to stand, Yagi raised a fist in the air triumphantly as a sign that All Might would always be here. The mood changed like one was turning the page of a book. All Might could see the smile on Izuku's face as well as the others. And while they were genuinely sympathetic smiles, he could sense that they were happy to see him retain his heroic spirit. But Bakugo still had that gut-wrenching expression on his face, and it was going to be difficult to tell him about his condition. All Might would have that conversation with him soon, but for now, he continued to keep his fist raised in the air to inspire them with hope. The wind whipped around and blew away the smoke cloud behind him as his frazzled hair waved in the wind. Suddenly, he saw the group react with horror, jumping back with terrified expressions. Yagi was taken aback by this, confused at their sudden change in mood. But that's when a shadow fell over him along with the sound of a heavy boot planting itself on the ground. Toshinori slowly looked up, and his eyes widened in terror. The vigilante was still standing, looming over him like a monster from a horror movie. Yagi could only breathe fearfully as despair gripped his soul. He was completely at this man's mercy, but the doomslayer just stared down at All Might silently. While it would appear that the Slayer was either pissed off at him or mocking him, it was not the case. The Slayer was actually sporting a very small but proud smile. Why? Because there was a fist indentation in the center of his chest plate. Not only that, but the Doomslayer could taste a little bit of iron in his mouth. Taggart smiled a little bit more. Yagi had become the first mortal in existence to damage his suit and harm him. This man earned his undying respect. But looking at him now, the Slayer felt nothing but sympathy for this man. No one should be reduced to this. Especially not to a man who puts his life on the line every day for this country and gave him one of the few engaging fights he had in his life. The sound of an explosion ahead of him caught the Slayer's attention, and he glanced up to see the same blonde teen he walked past in the dining room propel himself like a rocket toward him. Bakugo shouted at the top of his lungs as he raised his hand, now covered in explosions, to strike at the Slayer. He drew in close and was about to unleash an explosive blast until the Doomslayer's hand shot out and clamped itself around Bakugo's face. Bakugo thrashed himself around as he banged his fists against the vigilante's arm, the experience reminding him of how he fought All Might during the final exams. "Kaken!" Izuku exclaimed. He wanted to jump in and save his friend, but his near-crippling fear of the vigilante prevented him from moving his legs. Everyone's minds were racing as they thought of how to save Bakugo and All Might from the vigilante without accidentally getting them hurt. For all they knew, the vigilante would crush Bakugo's skull if they tried to rescue him. Maruko grit her teeth in frustration and started looking around for anything she could use as a means to distract the vigilante. She eventually spotted a DSR-50 sniper rifle lying near a bifurcated saber and ran toward the weapon. As soon as she picked it up, her self-taught firearms training during her time as the vigilante Tiger Bunny came rushing back to her. She pulled back on the bolt and aimed through the scope with the crosshairs centered on the Slayer's visor. But Maruko couldn't keep her rifle steady due to her shaking hands. She still hadn't overcome the effects of the morphine yet. Through the scope, the crosshairs kept bouncing around in her vision, much to her chagrin. The vigilante then slowly took his attention off Bakugo to glare at Maruko. "Rumi, no. You'll hit the kid." Hawks yelled at her. "Damn it," Maruko swore to herself. The doomslayer kept staring at her as Bakugo struggled in his grip. Rumi gnashed her teeth together as the sniper rifle shook in her hands. "RRRRGHHH, god damn it." She threw the rifle to the ground and leaped high into the air towards the vigilante with her left leg raised high. Luna Blade. She swung down her foot to deliver an axe kick to the Slayer's head, but he caught her by the ankle. Maruko gasped as she was left dangling in the vigilante's grasp. With an infuriated growl, Maruko began kicking out with her remaining leg, bashing the vigilante in the visor with her heel. Her kicks did nothing to the Doomslayer, not even put a crack in his visor. Yagi could only watch in fear as the Slayer held up his two captives. He and the others were powerless to do anything. He struggled to force himself up and try to transform again, but then he felt something splash against his hand. Yagi glanced down and saw a clear liquid flowing across the pavement, pooling around himself and the vigilante. He smelled something in the air and realized that it was gasoline. His eyes found their way over to an overturned tanker with a large gash on its side, gushing gasoline across the ground. Bakugo let out a muffled snarl as he summoned explosions in his hands. Yagi's eyes dilated in terror. "Bakugo, no." Yagi yelled. "Oh shit, don't." Maruko freaked out as she too saw the gasoline around them. The Doomslayer, who had also picked up on the hero's panic and noticed the gasoline around his feet, threw Bakugo away from him, but it did not stop the boy from detonating an explosion in his hands. Sparks flew out from the blast and drifted downwards to the gasoline on the ground. Rumi felt her heart leap into his throat at the falling spark until the vigilante snatched All Might by the scruff of his loose-fitting uniform and flung them away down the street. Time slowed down to a snail's pace for Maruko. Sailing through the air across the street, her eyes widened in amazement as the vigilante stared back at her. Just like before, he saved her life again as well as All Might's life. She continued to stare at the Doomslayer just as a blinding explosion engulfed him. Maruko, Yagi, and Bakugo were thrown back further from the explosion, tumbling along the debris-ridden street as the wall of fire consumed half the area. Izuku, Ochako, Mirio, Aizawa, and Hawks came rushing over to help them. Another explosion came from the firewall that intensified the flames, forcing everyone to scramble away from it as quickly as they could. They were now several feet away from the conflagration, with some of them having to shield their eyes a little from how brightly it burned. But then, they saw something. Doom 2016, in pure spectrum. They could see a shape within the roaring flames that slowly materialized into view. It was the vigilante. He stood amongst the sea of fire, the flames licking at his suit, which had flecks of blood slowly being burned away by the intense heat. Like a deathly omen, he stood like an imposing statue before the terrified onlookers. He then lifted his head a little to give them a perfect view of the flames dancing in the reflection of his visor. And his eyes, his angry, soulless, hateful orbs filled with so much rage and fury that it would be enough to demoralize even the bravest of heroes. He glared at them with his unflinching gaze as they stared back in horror. They were terrified beyond the capacity for rational thought as every bone in their body shook. Everyone was now fully, 100% convinced that this man was a demon that clawed its way straight out of the blackest pits of hell. The doomslayer kept staring at them for a few more seconds, and then, just to show the group how seemingly supernatural he was, turned around and walked deeper into the sea of fire. He disappeared amongst the roaring flames like a phantom of death. High above, standing near the edge of a building overlooking the group and the wall of fire, Uriel and Usual watched the scene occurring below. Their attention shifted to the unconscious heroes, and the archangels could only feel regret. They wanted to stop the ensuing brawl so badly, but they were under law not to interfere in the matters of mortals unless they had been permitted to do so. The mortal realm was not ready to know about the ascendant realm, at least not yet, and now the once mythical Doomslayer was loose upon the world. His presence here would change Earth in ways none of them could even speculate on. Then again, his rage was only directed upon the Steel Sabers and the League of Villains. He also went out of his way to protect some of the civilians on the island, as well as give medical aid to Rumi Usajiyama. But his actions had attracted the attention of the Four Horsemen, and whatever plans they had for the Slayer would be kept strictly to themselves. The archangels knew they would only take action if the Bane of Hell's actions disrupted the eternal balance. However, despite the Slayer's slaughter upon Sabers, there were signs that he was not completely heartless. He had saved numerous lives, only rendered the heroes he fought unconscious, and his fight with all might was a test of strength, not a duel to the death. Uriel and Usual looked at each other before deciding to return to the Ascendant Realm to report their findings and observations. Usual flapped his beautiful, graceful wings and took flight into the clouds above. Uriel unfurled hers and was just about to follow her brother when the rays of the sun graced her eyes. Turning her head over to the right, light peeked over the horizon and brought the morning sun to Japan after a long night of bloodshed. Uriel sighed to herself before following Usual into the sky. She prayed that the Creator and the other deities of the Prime Council, in all of their infinite wisdom, knew what to do about the Doomslayer. To be continued. And that's it for today. I hope you enjoyed. Support the writer. Don't forget to like, sub, and share.